Chapter 563. When this painting was still hung in the Ji family's study, she was still young and her mother was still alive. At that time, it was her mother who carried her into the study to get something, and she even touched the painting. Jinwan thought that no matter how much this painting cost, she should buy it and hang it in the Ji family's study. This painting is indeed one of the 10 most valuable paintings in the country. Mo Jingshan's calm voice rang, and the man's eyes slowly fell on her face. Do you want it? Jinwan was about to speak when she suddenly heard some voices not far away. She turned around and saw that 2 rows away from their seats, about 6 or 7 meters away, the Rong siblings were sitting there. Someone got up to go out and walked past them and their voice reached here. Jinwan's eyes happened to meet Rong Cheng's, and the indifference on Rong Cheng's face suddenly turned into obvious coldness. Jinwan, it was just that his sister was rejected by the man she liked, and the man his sister liked showed up here with a female companion. Did the general manager of the Rong Corporation have to show such a cold face to others? It was said that the rich young men in the capital circle were used to being arrogant, but now she knew what was real arrogance. Jinwan withdrew her gaze indifferently. Rong Yin sat beside Rong Cheng and kept her eyes on Mo Jingshan. The auction had been going on for almost an hour, and Mo Jingshan had been sitting by Jinwan's side the whole time, nor had he bid for any item. However, Mo Jingshan just sat there and did not move. In such a noisy environment, he was not drowned by the noisy crowd at all. Instead, he gave people a sense of isolation and solitude. The bidding had begun. A famous painting that was sold for more than 100 million yuan more than a decade or even nearly 20 years ago had been sold for 300 million yuan in the blink of an eye. Jinwan had wanted to wait until no one else bid, so that the price would not be driven up too high. However, the bidding was endless. When it reached the high point of 300 million yuan, it began to increase by 10 million yuan, and no one directly increased it by 100 million yuan. Jinwan had been staring at the painting, thinking of the scene when her mother liked to carry her back and forth in the study when she was still alive. She didn't notice when Rong Yen and Rong Cheng sat behind them. Suddenly, she heard the brother and sister talking behind them. Brother, this peach blossom painting, and the painting that Grandpa used to like were both made by Zhang Daqian. Grandpa has always liked Zhang Daqian's paintings. Shall we buy this one for him? After that, Rong Yen added, the price won't rise much now. I think it will stop bidding within 500 million yuan. It's just right to keep the price within 500 million yuan. As soon as Rong Yen said this, Jinwan's eyelids twitched. 500 million yuan? MN Group was rising. Although it had a lot of assets, she still had a lot of money. GG Group was still in. Jinwan Rong. Although Xinwan the COG, she had a company's company, Xinwan. After all, this was not a small amount. Even for a company like the MN Group, it was not a small amount. She did not have a very solid foundation, and a lot of the money was still in the company's liquid funds, which were used for the stable operation of the company's various projects. She had planned to sell it at the price of 200 or 300 million yuan. Did the Rong siblings also like this painting? Jinwan raised her eyes to look at the painting on the stage. Her expression was indifferent and she did not speak. At this moment, the auctioneer said, at present, Zhang Daqian's peach blossom painting has reached the high price of 390 million yuan. Does anyone want to continue bidding? At present, none of the famous paintings in China has exceeded the price of 400 million yuan. I wonder if it will break this price today. 400 million yuan. Rong Qing raised his paddle. The auctioneer's eyes lit up as he looked at Rong Qing, who had raised his hand to bid. Good, this is a historic moment. Is there anyone else who wants to continue bidding? The atmosphere in the hall was tense. No matter how famous Zhang Daqian's paintings were, the market price was more than 200 million yuan. Now the price had risen to 400 million yuan. They couldn't help but wonder if Zhang Daqian was deliberately driving up the price. No matter how much he liked to collect at this price, the paintings that he hid at home every day were not things that he could bring out. Other than satisfying his hobby, there was no other value. After considering for a long time, the voices in the room gradually became much weaker, and no one continued to bid. There shouldn't be any more bids, right? Rong Yin sat beside Rong Cheng and whispered. From time to time, Jinwan gently tapped her knee with the number plate in her hand. She stared at the painting, struggling in her heart. Should she bid a high price for this painting that she had seen with her mother when she was a child, for something that the Ji family had lost, or should she consider that MN Group was on the rise and needed money? 500 million yuan was enough for the company to do a lot of things. 400 million yuan going once, 400 million yuan going twice. The auctioneer solemnly announced, 400 million yuan going. Jinwan was about to raise the number plate in her hand to bid, but the moment she raised her hand, the man next to her had already raised his hand. His low, indifferent voice rang like thunder in the trapezoidal hall. 600 million yuan. There was a strange silence in the hall for a moment, and then there was a burst of gasps. 600 million yuan. In the history of domestic auctions, this was the only calligraphy and painting that had reached this price. Although Zhang Daqian's calligraphy and painting were expensive, this price was still too high. Many people in the hall had given up when the price was just 400 million yuan, let alone this price, which directly raised the threshold to the point that no one dared to bid. There was silence in the hall. The Rong siblings didn't expect that Mo Jingshan, who rarely participated in auctions like this, would suddenly bid. Rong Yan instantly pursed her lips and looked at the cold back of the man in front of her. 600 million yuan going once, 600 million yuan going twice. 600 million yuan going thrice, sold. The auctioneer excitedly hammered the price. Rong Cheng's face was very pale. He got up at the moment the hammer fell and Rong Yan hurriedly held him. Brother. Jin Wan had been sitting in her seat and didn't get up. She didn't know why Mo Jingshan offered such a high price. If it was just to help her win this painting, she could understand. After all, not to mention the wealth of Shine Group, even the financial resources of the former Mo Corporation in the country couldn't be compared with those of ordinary people. But to buy a painting with 600 million yuan, she felt her heart ache. Hearing Rong Cheng's angry voice behind her, she vaguely felt that because Rong Cheng had tripped her up in the bathroom, Mo Jingshan didn't leave any room for him to bid for this painting and didn't even give him the qualification to compete with him. Chapter 564. Rong Yan stopped. Rong Cheng got up and walked behind Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan had no interest in what she wanted to say or do. She sat in her seat and didn't get up. Rong Yan came over and said, Mr. Mo, my grandfather has always liked Zhang Daqian's paintings. Recently it's his birthday. I wanted to give this painting to him with my brother, but I didn't expect you to like it too. But I haven't heard that you are interested in antiques or paintings. Are you going to give it to Grandfather Mo? Hearing Rong Yan call Grandfather Mo, Jin Wan's face became colder, but she still sat in her seat and listened quietly without any movement. How about this? I know Grandfather Mo's birthday is still 2 or 3 months away. Mr. Mo, why don't you give this Tao Yuan painting to us? We'll pay the price of 600 million yuan. My brother and I will give this painting to Grandfather Mo. When Grandfather Mo celebrates his birthday, my brother and I will go to High City to congratulate him and give him a famous painting or antique that is more valuable than Tao Yuan painting. In this way the Rong family and the Mo family will have a long-term friendship. Jin Wan silently glanced at the crowd in the distance that was gradually shrinking. Ah, what a good plan. Although Mo Jingshan had attended many banquets and charity auctions, he rarely bid for anything in his own name. Today's painting was a rare occasion. Rong Yan was going to take away the painting under Mo Jingshan's name and go to the Mo family with the excuse of congratulating him. After all, she owed him a favor. Even if she took the initiative to go to the Mo family, it wouldn't be unreasonable. Who said this? Rong Yan was a little white rabbit. She was clearly a woman who couldn't be any smarter. 600 million yuan was not a small amount, but it was clear that the Rong siblings wouldn't think much of it. On the contrary, Jin Wan had been struggling with the price of 500 million yuan for a long time. Jin Wan expressionlessly slapped the number in her hand onto the seat that had been left empty after the old CEO had left. But as soon as she looked up, she met the man's dark and deep eyes. She held her breath. She was controlling her emotions and didn't show anything. The painting wasn't hers anyway. Just now, after the auction, he had glanced at her, making her think that he had bid for this painting for her. But now he had asked Rong Yan to come and bargain with him. It sounded like Rong Yan wanted to buy the painting at the same price and then go to Grandfather Mo's birthday party in the future. This was a very friendly way and there was no reason for him to refuse. After all, the Rong clan was indeed qualified to have dealings with the Mo clan. With the Rong family's status, there was no reason for Mo Jingshan to make enemies for the Mo family. Jin Wan's expression was expressionless. She lowered her eyes to pack up the bag on her lap, no longer looking at him. She heard the man say softly and lightly, as far as I know, Elder Rong's obsession with calligraphy and painting is indeed extraordinary. You don't have to pay this 600 million yuan, and you don't have to care how much it is. Jin Wan paused in taking out her phone from her bag. Was he planning to give the painting to Elder Rong? Jin Wan had been controlling all her emotions, but now she clenched her cell phone a little tighter. Mo Jingshan watched as she quietly lowered her gaze to look for her phone in her bag. His lips curved slightly. Rong Yen also thought he meant this, and her eyes were suddenly tinged with surprise. Mr. Mo, you'll be in time for my grandfather's birthday when you're in Beijing. Are you going to attend his birthday party? She was asking him if he was going to give the painting to her grandfather in his own name. Rong Qing sneered. Mo, since you despise the Rong family so much, why do you have to give the painting to the Rong family? We can afford this 600 million yuan. Mo, you don't have to be so generous. Rong Qing had been suppressing his anger since the incident in the bathroom. He didn't intend to lose face at all and even wanted to win back some of it now. But to everyone's surprise, Mo Jingshan's next words were, "When did I say I would give this painting to the Rong family?" Rong Yan's expression froze and Rong Qing's face also darkened. Rong Yan gradually widened her eyes. Mr. Mo Jingshan's calm, deep eyes met Rong Yan's stunned gaze and he said indifferently, "This painting is not for anyone's birthday. Miss Rong, you're thinking too much." Rong Yan. Then why did you buy it? You don't like these things. Only Miss Rong wants to buy it for Elder Rong, but I can't buy it for someone more meaningful? Rong Yan immediately bit her lip. Rong Cheng's face was cold and his tone was full of displeasure. Rong Yan, don't you understand? President Mo is clearly telling you that he won't give this painting to you, nor does he intend to give it to the Rong family. President Mo is a businessman, so he must have his reasons for bidding for this famous painting at such a high price. I'm afraid he didn't bid for this painting for you but for Miss Ji. Rong Cheng's tone was very unhappy, and he didn't intend to let his sister and Mo Jingshan have any entanglement. This time he stood on the same side as the elders of the family. He would no longer help Rong Yan chase men, but would only make Rong Yan stay away from men like Mo Jingshan in the future. Was this why Mo Jingshan listened to Rong Yan's words so patiently? He couldn't treat a family like the Rong family the same way he treated other flowers and plants. It was better to let the other party see the situation clearly and take the initiative to let go, so as to avoid endless entanglement in the future. After hearing Rong Cheng's words, Jinwan didn't speak, but she had already understood Mo Jingshan's intention. She didn't say anything but turned her eyes, only to see that Mo Jingshan had been standing by her side the whole time. His black shirt and trousers were full of elegance and nobility. Even in front of the famous heir of the Rong family in Jing City, he didn't reduce his aura at all. At this moment, Rong Cheng looked as if he couldn't wait to take Rong Yan away, lest they were really looked down upon by the Mo family of High City. Jinwan looked at Mo Jingshan with a complicated look in her eyes. This man's calm attitude and meticulous handling of every matter were so reasonable, and his strategy was amazing. This was one of the things that others couldn't catch up to, but it was also one of the things that she loved and hated. It was just like the reason why she was so cruel to divorce him. Later on she finally found out the reason. Everything was so reasonable that she couldn't hate him even if she wanted to. But what on earth did she blame him for? She blamed him for his calmness when he was in control of everything. She blamed him for his calmness when he stabbed her heart again and again. She blamed him for everything he did. He never wavered, but he was inhumanly calm. Chapter 565. Mo Jingshan glanced at Jinwan who had been sitting there quietly. What? You hesitated for a long time and didn't know whether to buy it or not. I bought it for you but now I'm too embarrassed to take it back? Jinwan, all her complex emotions disappeared as soon as the man spoke. Jinwan saw that a staff member had carried the rolled-up painting to her side. She looked at the painting and snorted. Mo, you're so rich. How can I, a small person in charge of MN Group, compare to you? The man's thin lips curved into a faint smile. You don't want it? Then I'll give this painting to the Rong family. Yes. Jinwan reached out and picked up the painting as soon as the staff member brought it to her, not intending to give it away at all. I thought you had a backbone. Backbone depended on the situation. This painting was what she wanted, and it was closely related to many of her childhood memories. Besides, why did she give it to the Rong family? Knowing that he said this deliberately, Jinwan still chose to take the bait. Anyway, she didn't pay for it. At most, she would give up her dignity, and this famous painting worth hundreds of millions of yuan would be easily won. What was wrong with it? She wasn't a hot-blooded young man who would suffer because of his pride. She was very sensible now. As long as it was beneficial to her, she would definitely be able to yield and stand tall according to the circumstances. Jinwan held the rolled-up painting in her arms, which was protected by a layer of transparent wrapping paper. She looked down at the painting in her arms and gradually gave an imperceptible smile. Thank you. When I give this painting to my father, I'll tell him that you bought it for him." Seeing that she was in a good mood, the man's eyes were still full of indulgence. "It doesn't matter who gave it to me. It's just a painting." Was it just a painting? Rong Yen had been standing there stiffly, and the expression on her face had been petrified for a long time. Even if the Rong family was rich and powerful, they didn't dare to say that something worth 600 million yuan was just a painting. Earlier, her brother had said that Mo Jingshan had bought this painting for Miss Ji. She had thought that it was impossible. Miss Ji did not seem like someone who would like this kind of thing. She did not expect that it was for her father, and even Mo Jingshan had clearly said so. Jin Wan clearly hadn't said anything. How did he know she wanted it? How would he know that Miss Ji's father would like this kind of thing? Could it be that he liked Miss Ji as much as she liked him? Did he investigate everyone in her family just to get to know her? Or could it be that he and this Miss Ji had other connections and past that she couldn't guess? Rong Yan's mouth was full of bitterness. "COMO, there are many kinds of famous paintings. The more expensive ones can be found abroad. The Rong family has Qi Baisher's 12 landscape screens, which was bought by my grandfather at a foreign auction in his early years and has been treasuring it at home. But he prefers Zhang Daqian's painting. If Miss Ji likes it, we can exchange Qi Baisher's painting for Zhang Daqian's painting. After all, my grandfather's birthday is coming up. Please give me this painting, Miss Ji." Jin Wan didn't seem to be swayed at all. Instead, she felt that Miss Rong was really spoiled. How could she ask someone to give her the painting at this time? "Then I'm really sorry, Miss Rong. This painting has been hanging in my father's study since I was young. Later, for some reason, it was transferred to someone else's hands. Now, I'm just looking for something that originally belonged to my family. Even if you give me something 10 times more expensive in exchange for something this meaningful, I won't agree." Jin Wan said flatly, "When it comes to paintings, my father also has works by great masters such as Qi Baisher and Zhang Daqian in modern times and Tang Yin in ancient times. But this is the only one which is of great significance to our family. I can't bear to part with it, but I won't." With that, Jin Wan seemed to unconsciously hold the painting tighter in her arms. Mo Jingshan looked at her subconscious movement, raised his eyebrows and smiled. Did she think no one could snatch it away? Seeing him smiling, Jin Wan glared back at him and simply put the painting back into the hands of the staff. Anyway, after leaving here, the staff would send the painting to the hotel where they stayed intact. Rong Yen looked at their eyes. It was clear that no one else could intervene. Jin Wan's angry attitude and Mo Jingshan's indulgent and doting eyes were obviously because he liked her. Otherwise, no woman could be so angry in front of Mo Jingshan. Rong Cheng's face was as cold as an iceberg and Rong Yan's eyes were a little red. "Since this painting is of great significance to Miss Ji, I apologize for disturbing you just now." With that, Rong Yan turned to take Rong Cheng's arm. When she was about to leave, she suddenly heard Jin Wan's indifferent voice. "Miss Rong, didn't you just sprain your ankle? Have you recovered so soon?" Rong Yan paused and didn't look back. When Rong Cheng was about to look back, she took his hand hard and didn't let her brother stand up for her again. After all, what happened in the bathroom just now was indeed their fault. Jin Wan didn't force them to apologize when Mo Jingshan rushed over and didn't make a fuss. Instead, she chose to keep the peace, which showed that Jin Wan had a sense of propriety. Now if she and her brother made a fuss here, it would seem that the Rong family was unreasonable. Seeing the Rong siblings leave, Jin Wan's eyes moved away from their backs. When she was about to leave, she saw Mo Jingshan's eyes fall on her face. When their eyes met, Jin Wan thought of the painting just now and immediately withdrew her eyes, saying, "I'll return the money to you when we go back." However, the man smiled lightly and said in a low voice, "Pay with your body." Jin Wan took a look at him. "Okay." When the man's eyes lit up and he looked at her, she suddenly smiled again. "I can pay with my body, but only tonight." Mo Jingshan. There were still 2 days before her period ended. It was obviously an empty promise. The 600 million yuan would be wasted on her, and there would be no return. The man glanced at her expressionlessly, turned around and walked out with his back to her. Jin Wan watched the man's unhappy back view, and the corners of her lips unconsciously curved into a smile. Jin Wan struggled to keep up with Mo Jingshan's footsteps. Just now, she thought that Mo Jingshan just didn't want to talk to her because of her empty promise, but it turned out that Mo Jingshan walked very fast and didn't even look back. Chapter 566. It wasn't until Mo Jingshan got into the car that Jin Wan noticed that the man didn't look back when he got into the car, leaving her alone outside the car, that she realized that Mo Jingshan was really angry? Oh right, a man who had been holding back for more than 3 years finally heard her promise to repay him with her body. In the end, it happened to be during her menstrual period. No man would be able to tolerate this kind of provocation. But was he really unable to tolerate it? When she had a stomachache, didn't he warm her belly while kissing her in bed? How could he be angry? He was already so shameless and had taken advantage of her so many times over the past few days. How could he still be angry? Jin-won thought for a long time, considering whether to continue taking this car or to take a taxi back to the hotel. He could be angry. She didn't intend to coax him. But when she thought of the painting just now, she realized that she didn't spend a penny. He did have good intentions. Jin-won finally made up her mind. When Xiao Hu came to open the car door for her, she lifted the hem of her dress and got into the car. She turned to see the man who was already sitting in the car. After thinking for a moment, she raised her hand and patted his shoulder generously. "You see, I didn't mean anything else just now. You really should thank me for the painting." The man glanced at her because she put her hand on his shoulder so openly, brushed her hand away expressionlessly and closed his eyes. Jin-won? She hadn't finished speaking. She had to thank him, lest he said she was an ingrate again. This man didn't seem to accept her thanks at all. Did he close his eyes and intend to not communicate with her for the time being? She wanted to thank him out of goodwill, but she was rejected? She withdrew her hand and no longer looked at him. Xiao Hu got into the car and drove steadily in the driver's seat, not looking at the situation in the back seat. Jin-won sat there, and next to her was the man who had his eyes closed and was ignoring her. Xiao Hu also did not speak. The car was extremely quiet. She simply bent down to take off the pair of high-heeled shoes that were more than 10 centimeters long. After wearing them all night, she wanted to relax her feet. However, when she bent down, her stomach felt uncomfortable and she quietly hissed. The man beside him did not move at all, and even Xiao Hu continued to drive quietly. Perhaps Xiao Hu felt that the atmosphere in the car was a little strange, so he reached out to turn on the music in the car, and a soothing light music played in the car. Jin-won had just taken off her shoes, stretched out her little feet, kicked her legs in the car, and then gently placed her feet on a relatively clean spot in the middle. She was thinking. After all, Mo Jingshan had given her enough face today. Not only did he not make her suffer a loss, from the gown to the diamond jewelry to the famous painting at night, it didn't seem right for her to continue holding back her temper. But in the blink of an eye, she saw that the man had his eyes closed and was completely ignoring her, so she pulled her face back and glared at him for a long time. The man suddenly opened his eyes and happened to meet her even more glaring eyes. Jin-won had no time to move her eyes away and immediately met his eyes. The cold man looked at her indifferently, then glanced at her bare, fair and tender little feet that were placed on the seat between the two of them. Half of her feet were covered by the long gauze skirt, faintly discernible. He said coldly, "Put on your shoes." "I've been wearing high-heeled shoes all night. I'll just loosen my feet. I'll put them on as soon as I get out of the car." Jin-won withdrew her gaze. Glancing at her little feet that seemed to be reaching toward him, and her toes unconsciously curled up under his gaze, Mo Jingshan only felt that his blood was surging more violently. He closed his eyes again and frowned. A woman's on her period. Can the soles of her feet be so cold? Aren't you afraid of catching a cold? It's not cold in the car. Seeing that Mo Jingshan seemed to be very unhappy, Jin-won restrained herself and thought for a moment before putting on her shoes. These shoes were matched by the designer when she was trying on the dress today. Although they were branded shoes and the style was very beautiful, they were only suitable for wearing at a banquet. It was very tiring to walk in them. She wore them all night and even now felt that her ankles were a little sore. The atmosphere in the car fell into silence again. Jin-won took out her cell phone from her bag and looked at it for a while. Some notices had popped up on some news apps. They were all news about the grand banquets and charity auctions held in Beijing, but most of them were very normal without any messy scandals. After looking at them for a while, she put down her cell phone and turned to see that Mo Jingshan still had his eyes closed. It was clear that he didn't want to see her tonight. She looked back at the car behind them, which was the car of the auction staff. They were responsible for following them and sending the paintings to the hotel. After all, she owed him a big favor. Jin-won thought for a while and decided to coax him. After all, it was 600 million yuan. That painting is indeed very meaningful to me. When my mother was still alive, she would often carry me to my father's study. Even though Ji Hongwen is not my biological father, this deep-rooted affection from a young age is still there. Retrieving this painting has also allowed me to retrieve a lot of things from when I was a child. In my heart there is a great sense of satisfaction. The man didn't open his eyes. So, let's not talk about anything else. Just talking about this painting, I'm really grateful to you. I've been struggling with the price of this painting. After all, MN Group is now on the rise, and I have to think carefully about something worth hundreds of millions of yuan. It's really a difficult problem for me to choose sensitively or rationally. Thank you for helping me make the choice. Mo Jingshin frowned and sneered. Since you're so grateful, why do you only thank me verbally? Sure enough, he was still angry about her deliberately deceiving him just now. Jinwan played dumb. Mo, you're so rich. How else do you want me to thank you? I said I would return it to you after returning to High City, and I really don't intend to owe you anything, but what else do you want me to do for you except verbally thanking you? Earlier on, Mo Jingshin had already opened his eyes. He turned to look at her. The woman was smiling. Her cheeks were overly fair and seemed to glow in the dim car. Her eyes were also bright and bright. Coupled with her expression of pretending to be ignorant and deliberately avoiding certain sensitive topics, she appeared especially lively and fragrant. Mo Jingshin felt his blood rush more violently. He had never been a lustful person. These years he only treated Jinwan differently. However, in the past 3 years she had changed too much. This woman's casual frown and smile was like an addictive poison to him. Chapter 567. Mo Jingshin just looked at her, saying nothing, but his eyes were deep. Jinwan looked at him and saw that he was staring at her expressionlessly, so she simply avoided his eyes. I've been busy all day. I'm tired. It will take a long time for us to get to the hotel, right? Then I'll take a nap in the car. With that, she closed her eyes. Mo Jingshin's face darkened slightly. But when he saw Jinwan leaning against the car door and curling up as if she was really going to sleep for a while, he sighed almost imperceptibly. This woman was really full of tricks and did whatever she wanted in front of him. Sure enough, she relied on her own strength. The car stopped in front of the Xingtang Hotel. After Xiao Hu stopped the car, he took the time to look back through the rearview mirror. "Mo." As soon as he said the word, Mo Jingshin gave him a cold look, motioning him to shut up. Xiao Hu immediately swallowed. Although he was already used to it, he was still a little shocked to see the scene behind him. Did the cold and aloof Mo he had heard before change his mind, or was the news he heard just hearsay? He actually saw Cog sleeping against Mo's body? And Mo was holding her in a good mood? Mo and Cog were really... Not only was there something going on, but the situation was not ordinary. Xiao Hu abruptly looked away and didn't dare to look again. He had noticed that Jinwan seemed to have fallen asleep against the car door, but he really didn't pay much attention to how she ended up leaning against Mo. Whatever, at this time, he just needed to get out of the car quickly. Xiao Hu got out of the car but didn't take the car key away, leaving the space in the car for them. Mo Jingshin looked at the quiet sleeping face in his arms and scratched her face with his fingers. She fell asleep and suddenly fell to his side when the car turned a corner. Coincidentally, she almost rested her head on his thigh, but he just caught her and held the back of her head with his palm. Then the woman arched into his arms as if sleeping very comfortably. At this moment, the woman in a long gauze dress was bending over on the seat behind him. Using the strength of his hand supporting the back of her head, she directly lay in his arms and continued to sleep. No matter how defensive she was when she slept, as long as she was in his arms, she would definitely continue to sleep without the slightest intention of being woken up. It was very quiet in the car and it was already 11:30 at night. In this prosperous area of Jing City, the number of cars passing by at night didn't decrease, and from time to time, the headlights of the cars flashed by outside. Mo Jingshin didn't rush to wake Jinwan up. He even felt that he was particularly fond of her quiet and obedient look when she didn't resist or glare at him because of his affection. He gently stroked her hand with his fingers. Although it was not comfortable to sleep in the car, if she planned to sleep in his arms like this all night, he would let her sleep. After an unknown period of time, Mo Jingshin sat in the quiet car, watching the heavy traffic outside. His fingers ran through her hair again, and he suddenly heard her mutter something. "What are you talking about?" Mo Jingshin asked. Mo Jingshin, the man frowned. Jinwan thought she couldn't fall asleep in the car, but she didn't expect that not only did she fall asleep, but she also seemed to sleep very well and had a dream. In the dream she saw Mo Jingshin sitting in the office of Shine Group. As she had seen him every time, he was serious at work, full of the aura of a superior, and dealt with any matter in the company swiftly and decisively. When he looked in the direction of the door he was even more handsome. On this man's face, there was silence and indifference, but also his unique beauty. She was about to go in and say hello to him when she saw there was another person behind him. Rongyan. He looked calmly at Jin Wan in front of the door, then turned around to take the coffee that Rong Yen had just made for him and touched Rong Yen's hand. Rong Yen blushed and stood beside him with a sweet smile. There were still some documents in Rong Yen's hand, so she leaned over his desk to talk about the documents with him. When she leaned over, her movement was so big that even the scenery under her collar was exposed. Mo Jingshan seemed to be moved by this. He reached out and circled Rong Yen into his arms, put her on his lap, and then the two of them began to hug and kiss in the office. Jin Wan was stunned and rushed in to pull Rong Yen away from his arms, but the two of them not only hugged each other tightly, but even when she reached out to touch them, she found that her hands touched nothing on their bodies. She couldn't feel anything at all. The two of them were still kissing unscrupulously in front of her. Rong Yen endured Mo Jingshan's kiss and took off her shoes. Wearing the kind of stockings she often wore in the office, she wriggled in Mo Jingshan's arms, looking innocent and sexy. The two of them kissed passionately as if there was no one else around them, as if they were going to take the office to bed at will. Seeing Mo Jingshan holding Rong Yan's face, their lips were glued to each other as if they could not be separated. Jin Wan felt that she was about to explode. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push them away. Yes, when Rong Yan was with Mo Jingshan, she was not in High City at all. She was still in London. How could she stop all this? But Mo Jingshan, this shameless man, had just supported her and bought her a painting, but in the blink of an eye, he was hugging Rong Yan. He was a scum. Scum from head to toe. Mo Jingshan, bastard, Mo Jingshan. As Jin Wan fell asleep, she suddenly furrowed her brows as though she was enduring a great anger. She even slapped his body twice with her hand, and as though she was still angry, her feet kicked against the car door. Mo Jingshan pressed down on her hands that were clenched into fists in her sleep and leaned close to her lips to hear her words clearly. In the end, all he heard was her calling his name again and scolding him. The man's handsome face froze and he coldly narrowed his eyes at the woman who didn't forget to scold him in her sleep. In her dream, Jin Wan suddenly felt that the air around her was not very good, as if there was some kind of pressure. She tried to wave her hand but seemed to be held. She subconsciously opened her eyes and was caught off guard by a pair of deep, dark eyes. They were as deep as ink, like a whirlpool of attraction, sucking her in the silent deep sea and leaving her nowhere to escape. Chapter 568. As the man suddenly approached, Jin Wan's face tightened. The messy images in her dream overlapped with the man in front of her, and she subconsciously pushed him away. In the end, because she pushed him too hard and seemed to dislike his intimacy, the man looked at her coldly. What strange things did you dream of? Jin Wan's face turned red and she looked at him coldly. Did you dream of something strange? Jin Wan, her brain didn't realize it until now. It turned out to be a dream. She dreamt that Mo Jingshan and Rong Yan were kissing each other in the office. Why did you get so close to me just now? Jin Wan hadn't recovered from the shocking scenes in her dream, and her tone was full of distance and even a bit sarcastic. Mo Jingshan sneered. Did you see it clearly? Did I get close to you, or did you suddenly lean into my arms and hold my shirt when you fell asleep? Jin Wan looked down at the marks on his shirt that she had just pressed against him, pursed her lips, and then turned to look out of the car window, only to find that the car was parked in the parking lot of Xingtang Hotel. When did you arrive? Why didn't you wake me up? She asked. Mo Jingshan only narrowed his eyes because she suddenly became much colder after waking up. The man's ink-black eyes were cold. What on earth did you dream of just now? Jin Wan glanced at him. Why do you care what I dream of? If I didn't hear it wrong, you just scolded me in your dream? Jin Wan, did he hear it? Did she have the habit of talking in her sleep? Why didn't she know it herself? But when she thought about it, it didn't seem good for her to vent her anger on him because of a dream, but the second miss of the Jing City family really gave her a knot in her heart. She was simply a drama queen. She said he didn't have a woman by his side when she pursued him, and she said it was fair and above board, but in fact, it was just an excuse to pursue a man. Why did she have to find so many excuses for herself? Why did she hate Rong Yan so much? Although she didn't have much contact with Mo Jingshan when she was in High City, she was not as straightforward as in Shuyan. At least when in Shuyan was Mo Jingshan's secretary, she was absolutely smart and knew what to say and what to do. Although she used to be one of Jin Wan's rivals in love, at least in Shuyan was not so disgusting. She knew Mo Jingshan wouldn't do that in her dream, but she still couldn't put on a good face. She just glanced at him again and didn't answer but asked, "It's so late. Why don't you get out of the car?" Mo Jingshan's face didn't change, but fortunately he didn't ask her about the dream. She felt that she must have scolded him and seriously provoked him. Jean Wan placed her hand on the car door and was about to alight when she turned back to see that the man's expression had not changed. She couldn't help but ask, "What exactly did I scold you about earlier?" Mo Jingshin sneered. "You're asking me? Is this how you treat me now? You can't help but scold me when you're sleeping and dreaming?" Jean Wan looked innocent. "It's just a dream. I dreamed of something unpleasant, so I scolded you. How do you know I was scolding you?" The man was expressionless. "You called my name and scolded me as a bastard, a disgusting man and a rogue." Jean Wan, yes, he had polluted the environment of her dream and greatly affected the quality of her sleep. When she saw that scene in her dream, it was polite enough for her to just scold him as a bastard. "Oh, then you may have misheard," Jean Wan said expressionlessly. Jean Wan said deadpan, "I was scolding someone in my dream. I suddenly saw you, so I called your name. You can't blame me for what I said in my sleep. People can dream about anything." Mo Jingshin sneered. "I don't blame you for what you said in your dream, but you blame your dream." Jean Wan? His words seemed to make sense. She became serious and changed the subject. "You're not going back to the hotel? Are you going to stay here tonight?" The man didn't speak. He really wanted to cut open this woman's head to see what was in it and what kind of messy dream she had. Why did she stare at him with disdain as if he were a stinky rogue as soon as she opened her eyes? If he really wanted to be a rogue, Jean Wan would probably still be living obediently in Aolan International and couldn't get out even if she wanted to. Mo Jingshin got out of the car. Jean Wan quickly put on her shoes, but because the heels were too high, it was inconvenient for her to get out of the car. She reached out to ask him to help her, but the man got out of the car first. When she waved at him to ask him for help, he expressionlessly walked away as if he didn't see her raised hand. She had to get out of the car on her 10-centimeter high heels. She remembered that the car key was still there, so she turned to the driver's seat to pull it out and took the key and the electronic car key to the hotel. The shoes were fine on the flat road, but it was a little difficult to get out of the car. If he didn't help her, then he wouldn't help her. She didn't want to beg him. When entering the hotel, Mo Jingshin seemed to finally remember to look back at her mercifully in case she really couldn't keep up. However, when she came over, she didn't even look at him, turned the car key casually in her hand, leisurely stepped on her 10-centimeter high stilettos, and walked in front of him without looking back. Xiao, who didn't dare to go back to his room after entering the hotel. After all, the car was just parked there. He was afraid that if there was any problem, he would be able to rush over, so he had been sitting in the hotel lobby on the first floor to rest. As soon as Jean Wan walked in, Xiao Hu came up quickly. "COG." Jean Wan threw the key casually, and Xiao Hu caught it in her beautiful and handsome posture. "By the way, COG, I've asked them to send the painting to your room. It's in your room now," Xiao Hu said politely. "Okay, thank you." With that, Jean Wan went straight into the elevator without looking back, as if the man who was so kind and remembered to look back at her had disappeared. Mo Jingshin watched as she elegantly waved her sleeves, leaving not a single cloud behind. His lips curved and he did not know whether to be angry or to laugh. Xiao Hu came over and stood aside to watch for a moment. The indulgence and helplessness in Co Mo's eyes, even a big man like him almost melted. How could that COG resist Co Mo for so long? Chapter 569. Jean Wan returned to her room and took a shower. It was already midnight, but she had slept for a long time in the car and did not feel sleepy. After showering and drying her hair, she changed into comfortable pajamas. At this moment, a staff member knocked on the door, saying that COMO had instructed her to prepare brown sugar water for her every night after returning to the hotel. She asked if she wanted to drink it at this late hour and that the kitchen had already prepared it. Jean Wan went to open the door. As she received the brown sugar water and thanked the staff, she suddenly saw that the door opposite her had also opened. The moment she met the man's gaze, Jean Wan immediately shifted her gaze away, refusing to look at him. She held the cup in her hand and turned to return to her room. When the staff member saw Mo Jingshin come out, she turned to him and nodded respectfully. Mr. Mo Jingshin nodded mildly. He glanced at the door that Jean Wan had quickly closed and walked over. Jean Wan was about to drink the brown sugar water after closing the door when she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening behind her. She paused and abruptly turned to glare angrily at the man who had just entered her room. Mo Jingshin, how dare you enter my room so casually again? The man glanced at the nightgown she had just changed into. Do you dress like this every day at home? Jean Wan lowered her head to look at the nightgown she was wearing. It was a dark pink silk nightgown with thin straps, but it was not the tacky kind of dark pink. It looked very sexy on her. Xiaoba had bought this nightgown for her when she was in England. It was said that it had cost Xiaoba half a month's salary. The silk material was very comfortable and Jinwan liked to wear it. In the past 2 years she had often worn it at home. This kind of silk nightgown with thin straps was only comfortable on her, but it was not the same for a man. Jinwan glanced at her exposed shoulders and collarbone, as well as the slightly visible cleavage on her chest. She pursed her lips and took a step back with the cup in her hands. At the same time she said, "If it's comfortable then I'll wear it often. Anyway, I'm usually alone at home. This time I only put some things I'm used to wearing in my suitcase. It's just a nightgown. What's wrong with that?" As she spoke, she drank a few mouthfuls of brown sugar water. After drinking more than half a cup, she put the cup down and looked back at the painting worth 600 million yuan on the shelf beside the bed. She paused and said, "It's getting late. Don't you have other work to continue tomorrow? I can't delay too many things while I'm on a business trip in Beijing because of my health. Go to bed early. As for this painting, I'm really grateful to you. You've said thank you at least 3 times tonight. How do I know if you're sincere or not? Do you still remember what you promised me?" What did she promise? Jinwan's hands were empty. For a moment she suddenly felt insecure. She was about to pick up the remaining half cup of brown sugar water, but the moment she put her hand down, her wrist was abruptly grabbed by the man. She was caught off guard and fell into his embrace. The man's chest bumped into her so hard that her nose hurt. Jinwan's breathing faltered. She raised her head to meet the man's dark gaze that seemed as though something must happen tonight. Her entire body tensed up. "What are you doing? You promised. You'll repay me with your body but only tonight, en?" Jinwan tried to shake off his hand but was unable to do so. "Then what about you? You clearly know that I'm on my period." The man lifted her chin with his well-defined fingers. He didn't care whether she was on her period or her period. He pulled her into his arms and pressed his thin lips against hers. Jinwan abruptly widened her eyes. What did he mean? Could it be that this man had been holding it in to the point of losing his mind? He didn't even care about her period? Was he going to force himself on her? Was he going to fight a bloody battle? Jinwan had always known long ago that if Mo Jingshan wanted to do something, no one would be able to stop him. She rushed to push him away forcefully, opening her mouth to bite down harshly on his lips. With great difficulty she finally moved away from his embrace. However, due to her nervousness she stammered, "I've only been in Jing City for 3 days. You entered my room on the first day and you entered my room on the second day. Could it be that you're planning on staying here and not leaving today? Don't force me to fly back to High City tomorrow. Mo Jingshan you." As she moved back, the man pressed against her. She could only take a step back. However, before she could finish her words, the man held her waist and pulled her back into his embrace. He harshly kissed her, blocking her lips. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes. When she was almost suffocated from the kiss, he finally gave her some breathing space. However, he pressed against her lips and said hoarsely, "If you want to sleep, I won't disturb you. You're on your period and I won't touch you. However, you're dressed like this in front of me. I don't think I should be polite." Hearing this, before Jinwan could speak, the man's kiss had already entered her mouth. He pried open her teeth and wantonly kissed her, causing her to feel numb and tremble. Jinwan was kissed by this sudden and violent kiss, and she felt as though all the strength in her body was about to be taken away. When the man abruptly pressed her onto the bed, Jinwan only had time to cry out softly before she was kissed again. Her waist was circled several inches toward the center of the bed. A few seconds later, the man's hand easily grabbed her wrist that was about to block between the two of them. However, he didn't press her hands to the sides of her body. Instead, he directly yanked them down and Jinwan's hands trembled. She stared in disbelief at the fire in the man's eyes and bit down harshly on his lips. "Mo Jingshan, what exactly do you want?" The man's hand forcefully pressed her hands there. Jinwan's face quickly turned red. "You?" His ink-black eyes were filled with endless desire. "Just like this. Just like this?" She instantly understood. Damn it. This bastard. She knew that coming to Jing City was equivalent to sending a sheep into a tiger's den. She naively thought that there would be no problem with her period protecting her. However, she neglected that this hateful man had completely treated her as a piece of fat meat that was right next to his mouth. He had never planned on letting her go. His breathing was even heavier than when he had just steadied her. It was hot and heavy and it sprayed all over the skin of her neck. It was hot and clear, and all her senses and sense of smell were drowned out by the man's scent. Because of this unyielding kiss, she felt as though her entire body was about to soften. Chapter 570. In truth, Jinwan had never been able to control this man, and right now Mo Jingshan was showing signs of losing control. How exactly did she provoke him tonight? Just as she was about to suffocate, Jinwan bit him heavily. She bit down hard and blood seeped out. She tasted the salty taste. The man withdrew from her mouth, but his lips remained pressed against hers. Their breaths intertwined. Her bite seemed to add a hint of bloodlust and violence to the storm-like intimacy, stirring up something buried deep in the man's bones. It was just a sexy nightgown, but it wasn't enough to make him lose his mind. However, ever since she returned from T-City 3 years ago, he hadn't been satisfied with all the things they had experienced. Once, twice, 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years. The long period of emptiness and longing had transformed into an endless desire for her. Tonight both of them were very clear-headed. He even knew the special condition of her body. He knew what he was doing, and his rationality had always been above everything else. However, the more clear-headed he was, the more he wanted her. Even if it was in a different way. In the past, no matter what stage they had reached, he had never allowed her to experience this. Mo Jingshan had always thought that he was sufficiently pure and had few desires. In the past 3 years, the occasional physical urges he experienced were only when he dreamed of her at night. Compared to other men, he had very little need for Gu Yuxing. However, every time Jinwan appeared before him, even if it was an expressionless face, even if it was just a glance toward him, back then, when he brought her to Aolan International after she was injured, only heaven knew how much restraint he had to use to resist touching her. He had to spend a lot of effort to restrain his desire for Jinwan. Jinwan, he called her name in a low and hoarse voice, holding her hand. When she tried to break free from his grip, he held her firmly and brought her hand down his body again and again. Jinwan's head was about to explode. Several times she tried desperately to withdraw her hand, but tonight, the man clearly did not intend to stop halfway. How could she escape from his grasp so easily? I originally considered that you weren't feeling well these few days, so I limited my care to you. I've already waited for 3 years, so I'm not in a hurry to wait for a few more days. Don't you think so? The man's breath was very hot, blowing against her ears. In the quiet room in the middle of the night, the man's sexy and husky voice rang out. You say I'm sanctimonious, you say I'm a refined scum. Haven't you already experienced my more refined scum side a few years ago? I know that you haven't let go of the knot in your heart, so I waited for you patiently and accompanied you. I knew that you weren't mentally prepared, so I restrained myself from hugging and kissing you. Intentionally or unintentionally, the man's lips brushed past her ears. Jinwan's entire body stiffened. But you promised that it would only be tonight. She was boasting shamelessly because she was still in those few days of the month. My current? Do you really think that I can't touch you just because you're on your period? He chuckled lowly, but it was not as cold and indifferent as usual. The longer he pressed her against the bed and kissed her, the thick, irresistible heat from his body made it impossible for her to avoid him. If you hadn't used such a method to provoke me, perhaps I would have let you off, but this result is what you deserve. Don't pull my hand. Jinwan's hand was about to melt from the heat. She trembled and tried to push him away, but one of her hands was pulled down, and the other was pressed by the side of her body. He kissed her ear. Answer me. In the few years you've been in London, have you been dressed like this every night? What did it have to do with him how she dressed? Jinwan glared at him. So what if I have? The man narrowed his eyes. It's very beautiful. Why didn't you wear it at home in the past? Jinwan, in the past, even if she wore long clothes and long pants at home, he would still strip her clean from top to bottom. Every day and night, she was bullied by this man until she could not straighten her back. How could she dare to dress like this at home? Wasn't that clearly sending herself into his mouth? It was impossible for her to even have a day of rest. How could she offend him by wearing such a nightgown? Jinwan was somewhat unhappy. She wanted to pull her hand back, but no matter how hard she tried, it was useless. At most, the sensation under her hand would become more and more obvious, and her face would turn redder from the force. Mo Jingshan, don't be so shameless. Let go of my hand. There was only one wall lamp in the room. Jinwan was used to using dark lamps at night to prevent the glare from affecting her sleep. Right now she was pressed on the bed by the man. Even though she was not considered short, she always appeared petite in front of the man. Her figure was also covered by the man's tall and broad body. Only some shadows fell on her face. The light between the two of them was not obvious, but they could see each other's reflections in the other's eyes. It was dark and heavy. The atmosphere was so ambiguous that it was suffocating. The man suddenly chuckled. Right now you're the person in charge of a company. You should know that you have to be honest. If you can't do what you promised, it'll be very damaging to your reputation. The moment she finished speaking, Jinwan was kissed once again. At the same time, her hand regained its freedom. After several seconds, she slowly withdrew her hand, but her eyes were dazed as she stared at the man who was focused on kissing her. Honest my head. Was she honest? She promised to repay him with her body, but she did not really agree. Who knew that he was actually thinking about this? This man's kissing skills were the same as 3 years ago. She even suspected that in the past 3 years, when he couldn't sleep at night, he had rehearsed the scene of him kissing her again and again in his heart. She had once been kissed by this man until she was dizzy, and now, all her thoughts had almost stopped. She was kissed to the point where she almost forgot where she was. It was only when she felt a chill beneath her legs that she realized her nightgown had been lifted. The man's hand continued moving up without any obstruction until it landed on her lower abdomen. His burning palms caressed her lower abdomen. This time, the gentle caress was different from the previous time when he simply hugged her to warm her abdomen. Jinwan's hair stood on end. She was stunned for a moment and wanted to retreat, but there was nowhere to retreat. Her lips were still pressed against the man's. Apart from a few whimpers, she could not make any other sounds. Chapter 571. Right now, Jinwan's figure was even more seductive than 3 years ago. She had been exercising for a long time, and her body was no longer as weak as before. Hearing her words, the man let go of her nightgown and moved closer to her back. He had already touched the button of her underwear, and her body immediately tensed up. In fact, he had not done anything deeper, but Jinwan hated herself for being so sensitive. She hated that her body always resisted strangers and even disliked them. However, all of Mo Jingshan's hugs and touches seemed to be teasing her, causing her to lose all resistance. The moment the man easily unbuttoned her underwear, Jinwan trembled and raised her eyes, only to hear the man chuckle by her ear. Then the kiss landed on her neck and moved downwards bit by bit. When the man's kiss landed on her through the thin nightgown, Jinwan abruptly couldn't help but turn her body into a taut bow. She raised her head and bit her lips hard to resist this indescribable, almost terrifying tide of passion. The woman's neck appeared particularly seductive because she was raised. Her hair, which was neither too long nor too short, was scattered on the bed. The man's movements continued. Jinwan couldn't help but bury her head in the man's shoulder, sobbing and whispering, "Mo Jingshan, don't." She could barely stop trembling. Her body, which had not been touched by a man for 3 years, was now sensitive to his incessant touch. It was as though many of the crazy and trembling memories of the night had been stirred up. She had already softened. Even though her hands had been released, she didn't have the strength to push him away. "Don't what?" The man's naughty hands paused on her body and slowly moved down. However, he pressed down forcefully through the thing she had just changed after showering. Jinwan's entire body suddenly felt limp and she almost couldn't breathe. And in less than half a minute he was even kissing her. At a time like this, when she couldn't do anything and was separated by a white, soft thing, she was actually about to be tortured to the point of insanity. She was angry. Angry because the man knew her body like the back of his hand. Angry because she couldn't withstand his teasing. Even more angry because she hated herself for not living up to his expectations. Under his kisses and teasing, she felt that she was no different from the woman from 3 years ago who would fall under him at any time. As she was kissed dizzily by him, she suddenly felt something cold touch her hand, and all her senses instantly tightened. It was the man's belt buckle. She lowered her head and saw that his belt buckle glowed coldly in the dim room. It was so cold that she shivered. She was forcefully pulled by him to undo his belt with one hand and gripped his clothes with the other. Her eyes trembled. "Mo Jingshan," she gritted her teeth. The uncontrollable discomfort and emptiness in her body almost drowned her, but she couldn't do anything. On the other hand, the man looked at her with a heavy gaze. He firmly pressed her hand on his belt and unbuckled it with her hand. Jinwan's eyes stared at him. In the dim light, she could clearly see the man's handsome face. Even in such a lustful moment, he still appeared excessively calm. His dark, burning eyes stared at her. Only the sweat on his forehead and his breathing that was heavier than usual made him look not as calm as he seemed on the surface. Jinwan felt that she was about to go crazy. Her face was already red to the point of exploding. Damn it. Her hands were sore. Crazy. Crazy. In the end, the man held her hand tightly. His entire body was as stiff as stone, and he almost crushed her wrist. He buried his head in her neck in satisfaction and released a long, heavy breath. Jinwan finally turned her head away with a flushed face. The man's breath brushed against her neck again and again. It was very hot and very warm. After a long time he did not leave. He only held her in this position and gently kissed her ear. "It's been hard on you." Jinwan, she really wanted to say scram, but considering the man's current state, if she said anything else to provoke him, her hand would most likely be crippled here tonight. Jinwan's body stiffened and did not speak. She allowed him to press against her like this. Finally, the man's breathing gradually calmed down. However, his slightly low and hoarse voice rang by her ear. It seemed to carry a hint of inquiry. "Is it very uncomfortable?" Jinwan rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. He actually asked her if she was uncomfortable? Nonsense. It wasn't like she didn't have physical needs. In the past 3 years, not only did he live like a monk, she clearly lived like a nun, okay? It was fine if she was kissed and hugged. Women were not sensitive in this aspect. But after being teased for so long and just now, how could she not feel anything? She was stuck in this situation where she wanted to do something but could not. Instead, she had greatly satisfied him. She felt so uncomfortable that she was about to explode, okay? Jinwan's blood pressure was about to soar. She clearly remembered that Mo Jingshan was, at least on the surface, a gentleman. When the two of them were still husband and wife, they could do anything. However, she remembered the time when he was schemed against by Mo Xiaoza and was drugged and locked in the Wanli Xingchen hotel. She was afraid that he would be too uncomfortable and suggested this idea, but because he was concerned about her feelings, he did not allow her to do anything. But today, Jinwan's eyes were about to turn red. She did not know if she was torturing him or herself. Right now, he was clearly incomparably satisfied, but she did not know if she would be able to sleep tonight. Most importantly, she could not take a cold shower right now. This was really killing her. The man's kiss landed on her cheek again. He softly and warmly said, "You want it too?" Jinwan continued to roll her eyes toward the ceiling. "No." Then she heard the man's muffled laughter coming from his chest. It was low, husky, and seductive. Because he was pressed against her, the slight vibration of his chest almost stirred up her emotions. His kiss shifted to the corner of her lips. He softly said in a comforting tone, "At most in 2 or 3 days you can start eating. At that time I'll wash up and lie on the bed for you to do whatever you want with me." As he spoke, his handsome face leaned toward her again. He kissed her harshly on the lips. Jinwan swallowed back the angry curses she was about to say. He kissed her until she even forgot what she wanted to scold and only glared at him with a red face. Only then did he smile in satisfaction and kiss her cheek twice. Jinwan was so angry that her nerves were about to break at any moment. Who wanted him to wash up and lie on the bed? Damn it, after she got through tonight, even if this man stripped naked on her bed in the future, all she wanted to do was tie him up tightly, and then find several women to do a striptease in front of him. She insisted on letting him taste the pain of being unable to be satisfied even though his body was on fire. Did he want her to take the initiative to bed him? Chapter 572. Mo Jingshan took a shower in her room. In the end, she threw him a bathrobe and told him to quickly scram back to his own room before he finally left. Jinwan also went to take a shower. In the end, she laid on the bed. In her heart, the words, I can't sleep," echoed repeatedly. Bastard. Right now, it was already past 1 in the morning. She actually couldn't sleep. The next day, Jinwan went downstairs for breakfast with dark circles under her eyes. It was past 7 o'clock when they had breakfast. Xiaohu and Mo Jingshan were also there. Seeing Jinwan walking back and forth around the round table with a breakfast plate in her hand, Xiaohu untactfully got up to look for food and asked, "Cog, didn't you sleep well last night?" Jinwan didn't look at Xiaohu's face. Jinwan coldly glanced at him. "Do I look like I slept well?" Xiaohu was startled. "Your complexion does seem like you didn't sleep well." Furthermore, her complexion was very bad. Her tone was also very harsh, as though she was very angry. However, Xiaohu did not dare to say the latter half of his sentence. He only picked up 2 pieces of bread and dejectedly turned back to the table to sit down for breakfast. He then turned to look at Mo, who was drinking coffee, and could not help but ask, Mo, it seems like Cog didn't sleep well last night. Today she has a meeting at the auditorium. Do you need me to help her sign in? Is she resting in the hotel?" "No need." Before Mo Jingshan could speak, Jinwan had already walked over with the tray. She expressionlessly spoke and then sat down. She did not even look at Mo Jingshan. Xiaohu, who had offended this ancestor this time? Wasn't she still fine yesterday? She was still in the car, and even slept on Mo's body. This night was clearly supposed to be peaceful? Why? Xiao Hu opened his mouth and watched in confusion as Jin Wan chewed hard on the toast during breakfast. He then glanced at the man by his side and softly said, "Xiaomo, it's true that a woman's mood isn't very good during these days of the month. Her mood is also unpredictable, right?" The man's expression didn't change. "Maybe I drank too much champagne last night. My mind isn't clear yet." Jin Wan immediately glared at him angrily, only to see Mo Jingshan calmly picking up his coffee cup and continuing to drink. He did not seem to be aware that he had done something naughty in her room last night. As it turned out, he had satisfied himself by relieving himself once. He felt refreshed. "I wonder who's the one who's not sober." Jin Wan no longer looked at him and rolled her eyes at the cup on the table. "If you didn't sleep well, then stay in the room for a while longer. Why did you wake up so early?" "I'm here on a business trip. I'm here for work, not to accompany a big boss on a sightseeing tour. I don't have the habit of staying in bed if I don't sleep well." Jin Wan continued to argue. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. "You received a painting worth 600 million yuan just by going on a business trip, and you can even receive all sorts of free and friendly services. Isn't this considered a sightseeing trip?" Jin Wan, she couldn't help but slap the knife and fork in her hand on the table. However, in order to control her temper, she grabbed the toast with her hand, as though she wanted to squash it as Mo Jingshan. However, the moment she held it in her hand, she thought of last night. The feeling that kept burning her. Jin Wan's expression turned even uglier. How could she agree to do such a thing for him? She must have drunk a few glasses at the banquet last night, so she wasn't sober enough. She didn't expect that her alcohol tolerance, which she thought had improved a lot, was still so poor. She definitely wasn't sober last night. Mo Jingshan, even if you have selfish motives, you don't have to be so brazen. If there really isn't any serious work to do in Jing City, I can return to High City at any time. Xia Tian hasn't returned to the company yet, and the people in charge of the other companies can't be the pillars of support for the time being. If I'm not in the company, our company is basically in a free-range state right now. If there's nothing serious, I'll go back first." The man's hand paused as he placed the coffee cup down. He glanced sideways at her. "In 2 days, there will be several business summits and exhibitions in Jing City, including some places arranged by the chairman of the Financial Association. You've only been in Jing City for 3 or 4 days and you can't sit still anymore?" She had already reached this stage in 3 or 4 days. If she really stayed here for half a month, wouldn't even her bones be left? Jin Wan quietly glanced at him. "I'll apply to be excluded from the list. I'll give up on all the activities in Jing City." "No." The man spoke without hesitation, not giving her any leeway at all. Jin Wan rolled her eyes at him and lowered her head to eat. Xiao Hu sat on the chair, drinking his milk as his heart trembled. It was really difficult for Mo. Usually, he never brought a woman out, nor would he bring a woman to any social events. This time he rarely brought a woman out on a business trip, but it turned out that Cog was so stubborn. Cough cough. Xiao Hu suddenly took the initiative to speak up with a smile. "Cog, you don't have to rush back to High City. The busiest time in Jing City is the first week of meetings. In 2 days, some activities arranged by the chairman of the Financial Association are more entertaining. For example, renting out a suburban villa for everyone to hold a joint queue, or renting out a resort for everyone to have fun, play cards, play ball, or go swimming. It's all very relaxing. In China, these were the ways of entertainment for these business tycoons. In fact, it was the same in London. There would often be some boss renting out a place for everyone to have fun together. Jin Wan's bowling and golf skills were all trained in the London business circle. She had long been tired of it and had no interest at all. Especially after what happened in the seaside resort in High City, she felt that the domestic business circle gatherings were meaningless. When she heard Xiao Hu mention swimming, her gaze immediately darkened. She resolutely spat out 5 words, "Even if I die, I won't go." Xiao Hu originally thought that she would relax after hearing these words. He did not expect to receive a cold rejection. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. Xiao Hu was startled and immediately lowered his head to continue eating his breakfast. He originally wanted to help Big Boss win a woman's heart, but it seemed like he had done more harm than good. Mo Jingshan withdrew his gaze and looked at Jin Wan. "It's fine if you don't want to go. I'm not interested in that kind of place where the nouveau riche gather. Why don't we find a hot spring hotel and change our way of vacation for a few days?" Ha 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 ha. Hot spring hotel? Did he want to see her in a swimsuit swaying in front of him? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Jin Wan coldly laughed and placed down the cutlery in her hands. I'm not going. After speaking, she stood up and continued to take food from the buffet area without looking back. Chapter 573. Xiao Hu finally found a place to display his abilities. His eyes immediately lit up as he said, "Deep? How about the Blue 7-Star Hotel? It's in Jing City's 2nd Ring Road. It's not far from here. If there's no traffic, we can reach it in 10 minutes. Deep Blue was a very famous scenic hotel in Beijing. Other than the hot spring pool, which was the cleanest in the country, and the 7-star service, there were also some special deep-sea themed rooms. Because there was no natural sea in Beijing, the rooms were surrounded by artificial ocean scenes. This way it could satisfy the needs of people for a room with a sea view, and on the other hand, it was enough to ensure safety. Mo Jingshan tapped the table lightly with one finger. He turned to see that Jin Wan was still looking for food in the dining area. One moment she was picking up some bacon, and the next moment she was asking someone to cook a bowl of rice noodles with vegetable soup. She had no intention of returning to the table immediately. His gaze did not change as he calmly asked, "How many more days until the work in Jing City? There are still a few business partners that I have to meet personally, including the person in charge of the financial association who has connections with High City. There are also 2 that I have to attend a meeting with at the National Business Institute. COG also has a few business partners that I should meet. After all, it's rare for me to come to Jing City. Based on this, it should be over in about a week at the earliest." Xiao Hu calculated the time as he spoke. For the time being, it's most convenient to stay in Xingtang Hotel. After all, this is Shine's place. People in Jing City often hold meetings or discuss business here. It's convenient for us to do anything. As for the Blue 7-Star Hotel, after I'm done, I can stay there for 3 to 4 days. At this moment, Jin Wan had returned with the rice noodles with vegetable soup that she had asked the chef to prepare for her. When she placed the bowl on the table, she raised her eyes to see that Xiao Hu was seriously calculating the time. From time to time he would take out his work schedule to look at. She turned to see that Mo Jingshan was still calmly drinking his coffee. She pretended that nothing had happened last night and ate quietly. After breakfast, they began their journey for the day. The first place they were going to today was the exhibition venue that they had made an appointment with their partners. It was the only place that was far away from Shengtang Hotel. According to Xiao Hu, it would take 2 hours to drive there. Because the distance was too far and there would be several serious traffic jams in the middle of the road, it was possible to take more than 2 hours. Jin Wan only responded with a sound and did not say anything else. Since she did not sleep well last night, it was not bad to sleep in the car for 2 hours. In the end, Mo Jingshan clearly saw through her thoughts. She turned to meet the man's amused gaze and was instantly angered. Who was the reason she couldn't sleep well last night? In the car, Jin Wan sat in the car and leaned against the door. Seeing her blatantly keeping a distance from him, Mo Jingshan couldn't help narrowing his eyes. There's only so much space in the car. Where can you hide? Do you need me to send you another car? Jin Wan originally thought that since they were coming to Jing City, there would definitely be a car arranged for them to pick them up and send them off. However, she did not expect that Mo Jingshan would choose to keep things simple. He only had Xiao Hu drive them and did not call anyone else over. As a result, she could only sit in the same car with him every day. It would be best if you could really send me another car. Jin Wan did not refuse. The man's handsome figure was elegant and cold. He coldly glanced at her. In your dreams. Jin Wan, when you're not feeling well, you enjoy my care, eat the porridge I personally cooked for you and sit in my car. You still want to keep your distance from me, yet you want to send another car to follow behind you. Are you here on a business trip or to anger me? Jin Wan chuckled and coldly said with displeasure, you used the excuse of taking care of me to run into my room in the middle of the night. Why didn't you tell me what you did when you were taking care of me? Xiao Hu, who was driving, heavens, hurry up and block his ears. This kind of flirting was very torturous, all right? The man watched her with a hint of a smile. I see that you don't reject my appearance every night. When have I not taken good care of you? Ha he he he. It was very appropriate. Appropriate to the point that she did not sleep much last night. Jin Wan leaned against the car door, trying to keep as far away from him as possible. The man glanced at her. Come here. Don't sit by the car door. Don't you find it hard to lean against? I'm fine sitting here. Jin Wan stubbornly turned her head away from the window. However, the place they were going to today was really very far. Jin Wan remained leaning against the car door for nearly half an hour. In the end, she really felt that the door was hard and uncomfortable, and her back was aching from sitting in such a position. She even said that she would sleep in the car for 2 hours. What the hell would she sleep for? She couldn't sleep in this position at all. But if she continued to sit there, it would be too embarrassing. Just as she calmly raised her hand to rub her waist that was hurting from being pressed against the car door, the man's long arm reached over. He did not allow her to refuse or struggle and pulled her back. At the same time, he held her shoulders and did not allow her to move. Jinwan passively leaned into his embrace. Jinwan, Mo Jingshan pressed her into his embrace and did not release her. Even when you're so uncomfortable, you still have to hold back your temper. You'd rather keep your distance from me even if your back hurts? Do you want to sleep in my arms for a while, or do you want to continue leaning against the car door and staring out the window to exhaust the little energy you have left? Choose. Jinwan was forcefully pressed into his embrace. She struggled but could not get up. She turned to see that Xiao, who did not turn back or look at the rearview mirror, as though nothing could enter his ears. She then raised her eyes to roll them at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan, where's your face? If I want to sleep, what position can't I sleep in? Why must I lean against your arms to sleep? Looking at his aloof and dignified manner, he did not seem to mind her sarcasm and retort at all. It was clear that he was greatly satisfied last night and was in a very good mood today. However, her mood was extremely bad. Jinwan suspected that his next sentence would be to boast about how warm and comfortable his embrace was. Thankfully he did not. As he held her, he gently patted her back that was so angry that her hair was about to stand on end. Today will be a busy day. Are you sure you don't want to sleep for a while? I'll lean against the back and sleep by myself. Jinwan's expression was stiff. She raised her hand to push the man's arm away from her shoulder. Chapter 574. Jinwan used her hand to push away his hand on her waist. She even used her nails to dig at him. Not only did Mo Jingshan not let go, but he held her even tighter. The man's indifferent voice came from above her head. Jinwan, I've already gone easy on you. Why are you still so stubborn? Jinwan immediately raised her eyes to glare at him. Afraid that Xiao Hu would hear her, she used a voice that only he could hear to say, weren't you already satisfied last night? Can't you let me sit quietly for a while? Why are you still hugging me? Let go. The man's expression was heavy. His voice was light and carried a hint of a chuckle. Who told you that I was satisfied just last night? Jinwan's originally relaxed heart instantly tensed up again. She even suspected that this man was not the Mo Jingshan she used to know. Her teeth began to itch. She gritted them and said, then what else do you want? Wasn't it enough for you to bully me last night? Could it be that you still want to? He abruptly sneered. His meaning was unclear, but it was as though he was pointing at something. When a man bullies a woman, there's never a need to use the kind of forceful method that you used last night to comfort me. You're just in a special period. I can't touch you. Be good and sleep in my arms. Don't stir up any more trouble, En? Jinwan still wanted to say something, but the man's handsome face suddenly enlarged in her vision. Realizing that he was going to kiss her in the car, her eyes almost popped out. She abruptly leaned her head back and secretly glanced at Xiao Hu, who was driving. She saw that Xiao Hu was still sitting there without turning back. He did not even glance at the rearview mirror. He was really self-aware. She did not even want to ask for help. Mo Jingshan understood Jinwan's bottom line. He could tease her as much as he wanted in private, but they were in the car and there were outsiders around. If he went too far, her temper would most likely be bad for several days. He did not kiss her in the end. He only patted her waist comfortingly. Are you sure you don't want to sleep for a while? Jinwan finally chose to push him in his arms again. When the man no longer forced her and let go of her waist, she stepped back, leaned against the back of the leather chair in the back, closed her eyes and planned to sleep like this. Then she really fell asleep just like that. Perhaps it was because he had used up some energy when he was struggling, or perhaps the sleepiness from last night had finally hit him. This time she finally fell asleep so quickly that she didn't need Mo Jingshan to hold her again. Her head tilted to the side and rested on the man's shoulder. 2 hours later, Xiao Hu stopped the car. Although Jinwan had fallen asleep, she opened her eyes when the car suddenly stopped. Her head was no longer resting on Mo Jingshan's shoulder because she had changed her position when she slept. She narrowed her eyes and looked out of the window. It was past 8 o'clock and it was almost 11 o'clock now. The sun was blazing at this time. She narrowed her eyes and looked out of the car window. Just as she was about to ask if they had arrived, she met the man's warm eyes. He didn't rush her to wake up and get out of the car. Instead, he waited patiently for her to wake up naturally. Fortunately, she was sensitive and woke up as soon as the car stopped. Otherwise, she didn't know how long she would have slept in the car. Have we arrived? She avoided the man's gaze and asked. Yes, we've arrived. COG, you've slept for more than an hour. It seems that you haven't had much rest in the hotel these days. Recently, you've been sleeping in the car, Xiaohu said very untimely. After saying that, he realized what he had just said. Looking at Jin Wan's awkward expression and Mo Jingshan's cold glance through the rearview mirror, Xiaohu's scalp went numb in an instant. Dead. He didn't mean to tease her. He just instinctively felt that COG really didn't sleep well last night. Should he explain it to her? But CO Mo's eyes were so fierce. He'd better not speak. Xiaohu scrambled out of the car. Jin Wan raised her hand and tidied her hair, which was a little messy because she had fallen asleep. Her shoulder-length hair was tied into a clean ponytail behind her head, mainly for business trips. She didn't tidy her hair every day as delicately as she usually did at home. What time will it be? She asked as she tidied up her hair. 11 o'clock. There's still 15 minutes to go. Don't worry. Mo Jingshan sat quietly by her side, watching the little woman raise her hand to take down her hairband, bite it by her lips, and then quickly tie up her hair with both hands. Hearing the time, Jin Wan was no longer in a hurry. She tidied up her hair, opened her bag, took out a lipstick that was not too dark but suitable for light makeup, and smeared it on her lips. When she rummaged in her bag for something to touch up, the man saw her cell phone in her bag. Your cell phone kept ringing when you fell asleep. Is there any news? Is there? Jin Wan picked up her cell phone, unlocked it and glanced at it. There were no messages, only a few messages from Xia Tian and recent photos of the baby in WeChat. Since Xia Tian gave birth to the baby, she had become a craze for posting pictures of the baby. Every day, not only did she post pictures of the baby to her WeChat moments, but she also sent a few more to Jin Wan. There were also 2 messages from her secretary, saying something about the company. Jin Wan glanced at them. And Xia Tian sent me a WeChat message. The man stared at her with deep eyes. WeChat. Jin Wan, who was about to put her cell phone back into her bag, paused and suddenly turned to look at the man. Don't you know what happened in the following years? You must know what's popular in China in the following years. Is WeChat very strange? The man was expressionless. I was in the United States and didn't have much contact with domestic things. Jin Wan, yes, WeChat had become particularly popular in China in recent years, and Weibo and WeChat had almost replaced QQ and other social media software in previous years. But in foreign countries, there were not many people who used it, and it was only popular in some Chinese circles and in China. No matter what stage he was in, he could only send her some messages but only some serious things. He didn't even send her a good morning or a good night, and he was even more reticent to others. Therefore, it was normal that he had never used WeChat. After all, even if his staff had helped him register a WeChat account, with his noble, cold and uncommunicative style, it was likely that he had long abandoned it and never touched it. Chapter 575. 15 minutes later, Jin Wan looked at the new WeChat friend list. No matter how she thought about it, she felt that she had been tricked by Mo Jingshan. She had already registered a WeChat friend for him, but why did he add him as a friend? Just now, when she asked him to choose a random profile picture, she searched through his phone's photo album for a long time, only to find some photos of the company's meeting documents. Not to mention selfies, there wasn't even a landscape picture. He couldn't use a photo of a meeting document as his profile picture, could he? Jin Wan said the scenery outside the car window was very good, so she asked him to take a photo outside the car window and use it as his profile picture. The man agreed, picked up his phone and took a photo outside the car window, but it wasn't his side of the car window but hers. So when the man changed his profile picture, Jin Wan clicked on the friend list and was instantly speechless. How could he take a photo of the scenery? He took a photo of her and the scenery outside the car window together. The name on the WeChat account he had just registered was still blank, and the man was not in a hurry to change his name. He just changed his profile picture and put the phone away. Jin Wan stared at the WeChat friend who had a blank name but used her photo as his profile picture and was so angry that her face turned black. It's 11 o'clock. Get out. The man got out of the car as if nothing had happened. Jin Wan, today they came to a place far from the center of Beijing to meet a few business partners. Mo Jingshan rarely visited in person, so these business partners specially chose a place to welcome him. Everyone gathered together to wait for Mo Jingshan's arrival. Jin Wan also had a few acquaintances here today, but they were not as close as Mo Jingshan to them, so she simply greeted them, exchanged business cards and chatted for a while before finding a place to sit down. Xiao Hu didn't follow Mo Jingshan to greet those partners but was told by Mo Jingshan to stay by Jin Wan's side and help her whenever she needed anything. It was rare for Xiao Hu to fulfill his duty as a bodyguard. Jin Wan sat there and he could do anything he wanted. Anyway, this ancestor in front of COMO had such a high status, so of course he had to serve her as if she were the Empress Dowager. Jin Wan was about to ask Xiao Hu to sit down and rest for a while, but before she could speak, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a figure from the corner of her eye. Her hand that was about to touch the glass paused and turned to look in that direction. After Mo Jingshan had decided on his itinerary in Jing City, Rong Yin had inquired about his itinerary these days and knew where he would go. Last night, she didn't get a chance to talk to Mo Jingshan at the banquet and the charity auction. Although she could see that Mo Jingshan really had no feelings for her and seemed to really love that Jin Wan, she couldn't accept it and sneaked out of home early. After all, she was the second daughter of a wealthy family in Jing City. No one dared to stop her if she wanted to come here. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had just talked with someone, Rong Yin came out of the lounge behind and walked up to him. Mr. Mo Jingshan was not surprised to see her here again. He just looked at her indifferently. He heard her but didn't respond. Did you come alone today? Rong Yin had been standing behind him and couldn't see what was going on in front of the door. It took her a long time to notice Mo Jingshan in the crowd, only to see that he didn't bring the woman named Jin Wan with him today. But she didn't know what he was thinking, so she didn't dare to ask why Jin Wan didn't come with him today. Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze landed on her. His pitch-black eyes were cold and emotionless. Second Miss Rong indeed has the capital to do as she pleases in Jing City. However, today's venue is not a banquet hall. Most of the people here are capitalistic businessmen, and the topics discussed here are all business matters. I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. Rong Yin smiled bitterly. You must know why I'm here. I've been strictly controlled by my family since I was a child. It's rare for me to come back to China after graduation and rebel, but I didn't expect that I'd come to nothing. Mr. Mo, I don't mean anything else. I just want to ask, what's so bad about me that you don't even bother to look at me? Mo Jingshan didn't speak. This man had a kind of indifference that made people tremble in fear. Even though she was the famous second daughter of the Rong family in the capital circle, she could only choose to be silent in front of him. She didn't have the slightest temper of a rich young lady. His indifference seemed to be able to spread everywhere, making her not even the slightest impulse to hug him or the courage to be shameless. Because she knew that the more she pestered him, the less he liked her. But when he glanced at her so coldly, she couldn't help but want to step back, but she held back. Am I not beautiful enough? My family background is not good enough? My education is not high enough? Or do you hate me because I'm too arrogant and domineering? I think I'm very gentle, at least in front of alien, and I'm rarely hated, but from the beginning to the present, you've never looked at me. I know, Mr. Mo, you've seen a lot of good women, but in this country, I'm confident that only the Rong family can match your family background. Even if you don't care about these things, you didn't have any other women around you in the past few years. Why can't you treat me? Mo Jingshan's eyes and voice were indifferent. Miss Rong, you've investigated me for so long. Don't you know that I've been married? Rong Yan's expression froze. She really didn't find out his past. Besides, Mo Jingshan's past was not something that anyone could easily find out. She had asked someone to help her investigate for so long, but they could only find out some superficial things. There were many things she wanted to know about his past, but she could not find out anything about it. You are married? Rong Yin couldn't believe it. Mo Jingshan's thin lips turned up slightly. He chuckled and glanced at the seat where Jin Wan was sitting. Rong Yin followed his gaze and looked in that direction. The moment she saw Jin Wan again, she suddenly understood everything. Even though there were still many things she didn't know, it seemed like she wasn't qualified to know. She pursed her lips, feeling very uncomfortable in her heart. Her face was also a little embarrassed, but when the words came to her mouth she could only say, "Sorry? I was rude." With that, she turned and left, not staying any longer, nor did she have the face to stay any longer. When Rong Yin left, Mo Jingshan returned to Jin Wan's side and sat down. Suddenly, he heard the little woman playing with a glass of water and asking, "Why don't you continue chatting with your Rong Yin? Why are you sitting here?" Chapter 576. Jin Wan said indifferently, "I don't care who she is. You don't need to explain to me." The man glanced sideways at her. "You're so jealous. Don't try to cover it up." Jin Wan glanced at him. "Why do I look like I'm jealous?" "You look like you are." She looked expressionlessly at the crowd. Your Rongyan is still there. Why did you ignore her after just a few words? On this occasion, she obviously came especially for you. After a pause she added, and she's still looking at you. The man looked at her again, then turned his head to look at Rongyan, who was still looking at him in the crowd, and said casually, she's just observing my relationship with you. Jinwan raised her eyebrows. What did you say to her? I said I'm married. Jinwan, she put the glass in her hand on the table and said coldly, you've already divorced. Why are you still talking about marriage? Are you using me as a shield? What are you thinking? Mo Jingshan said lightly, not to mention that you're married. Do you want her to continue to pester you with endless hope, or do you want the Rong family to target you? Jinwan sneered. Then should I thank you for helping me avoid so many troubles in this way? The Rong family is not so unreasonable. Although Rong Qing did go a bit too far, I think the Rong family cares more about their reputation and won't resort to such despicable means. At this moment, other partners took the initiative to come over and talk to Mo Jingshan, as if they couldn't wait to say something to Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's face didn't change at all. He just grunted, casually greeted them, and still sat opposite Jinwan, not avoiding her at all. At this time, some partners of MN Group happened to be nearby, so Jinwan got up to talk to them and didn't continue to sit here. The people around Mo Jingshan had left, but Jinwan still hadn't come back. Mo Jingshan sat quietly in his seat and saw Jinwan fluttering among the partners like a butterfly. Her every frown and smile was so charming. From time to time she took a glass of red wine and clinked glasses with those people. From time to time she would take a document handed over by a partner and read it, and then she would continue to talk to them with a smile. The business world was comparable to a social arena. Today Jinwan could still see some traces of her past coquettishness in private, but when she was at work or socializing she was like a fully armed female warrior, and a smiling female warrior at that. Jinwan hadn't come back yet, and Mo Jingshan was not in a hurry to call her. Looking at her figure over there, he remembered something and took out his cell phone to take a look. He opened the WeChat account that Jinwan had just set up for him, looked at his profile picture, smiled, and clicked on Jinwan's WeChat moments. Jinwan had been using WeChat for almost a year, but she had only posted a few posts on WeChat moments. The first one was a picture of the night sky in London taken by her cell phone. There was only one picture of the night sky and nothing was written on it. The second one was 2 months later. It was a picture of the messy desk full of documents in her office in London, accompanied by a hard-working emoji and 3 words, the third year. The third one was a picture of her hands and the hands of 2 other girls. Each hand stretched out in a V shape to form a 5-pointed star. Jinwan wrote on the photo, it's rare for me to come out for an outing and breathe the fresh air. Why are Feng Ling's and Xiaoba's hands whiter than mine? I'm not convinced. I'm calling Xia Tian, who is suntan in High City. Come quickly. Aggrieved. After that there were a few retweets of London financial reports and a chicken soup about workplace beliefs and so on. Then she didn't post any more posts on WeChat moments before returning to China. After returning to China, her WeChat moments were all blank except for a bird's eye view taken from the top floor of the Xingtang Hotel in Beijing 2 days ago, accompanied by a line of text. This business trip is really painful. Before that, during the period after returning to China, she didn't post a word or a photo. Whether it was the first time she met him after returning to China, or where they met again, or the gradual change in their relationship, she didn't say a word. It seemed that her heart was not disturbed at all. The man couldn't help frowning. Her WeChat moments were all about work, career, or friendship. He should be glad that she didn't mention any man, but at the same time she didn't mention himself, not even a little emotional. Mo Jingshan looked at her WeChat moments again and made sure that he didn't miss a single one. There was indeed no trace of him. The man put down his cell phone and looked expressionlessly at Jinwan, who had come back. Jinwan had just said too much and was a little thirsty. Xiao Hu quickly put a glass of juice on the table in front of Jinwan. Jinwan came over and took a sip. Then she took the cooperation plan she had just received from a partner and sat on the table to read it. After reading for a while, she suddenly felt the air around her was a little depressed. She raised her hand and took another sip of juice. When she looked up, she saw that Mo Jingshan was looking at her deeply. She said, "Why are you looking at me? Didn't you come to work today? CEO Mo seems to be very free." "COG, even you didn't pay much attention to our CEO Mo when he was busy? Just now there were a lot of people pestering him. It's rare for him to come here and sit quietly for a while. In this kind of formal social event, everyone acts according to the mood. It's obvious that COMO is resting here, so not many people dare to come over and talk, Xiaohu chimed in. Oh, it was because Boss Missouri didn't need to put on airs here. Just sitting here, people consciously gave him time to rest and no one dared to come over. Sure enough, different people were different. She still had to get up to chat and laugh with those partners or some bosses who were developing cooperative relationships, and then she had to come over with the cooperation plan. He just needed to sit here quietly and let others worship and respect him. She came to work to discuss this kind of thing and he came to work to just wait for the person to arrive. But why did he keep staring at her? They had been together from morning to night these days. Hadn't he got tired of looking at her? Jean Wan ignored him, lowered her head to continue to read the documents at hand, and took out a pen from her bag to carefully mark the problems in the cooperation plan in red circles. Seeing Jean Wan working so seriously, Mo Jingshan didn't speak but just looked at the woman who was immersed in her work and didn't take him seriously at all. Chapter 577. For the next 2 to 3 days they entered a busy work phase. Jean Wan's period of discomfort had finally passed. She could now go to work and socialize with all her might. She attended all sorts of meetings, exhibitions and other matters. On this trip to Jing City, the only major mistake she made was to believe Mo Jingshan's words. He said that there was no need to bring an assistant or secretary. As a result, she had to do everything personally. Of course, Mo Jingshan did not call Shenmu over. Instead he brought Xiaohu over. Clearly most of the time Xiaohu was treated as their chauffeur or housekeeper. All sorts of miscellaneous tasks were handled by Xiaohu. As for the other matters, Mo Jingshan rarely did them personally. For the past 2 days she had been so busy that she did not have any free time. Every day she would only return to the hotel after 10 o'clock at night. She would drag her tired body and take a shower before falling into a deep sleep. In the past few years the property market in the country had been on the rise. This time, there was a construction exhibition in Jing City that was jointly organized by the nation's property companies. All the major property companies in the country had been invited to participate. Although MN Group was diversified, it was still founded on property. Thus, it was also one of the invited names. Mo Jingshan was also invited, but at the same time he had a more important meeting to attend. Thus, Mo Jingshan left Xiaohu by Jean Wan's side and had Xiaohu accompany her to attend the construction exhibition. After arriving at the exhibition hall, Xiaohu eagerly helped Jean Wan with various matters. He went in first to make arrangements and then came out. "COG, I found a seat for you. You can sit down for the entire exhibition. You can also sit with the people in charge of BGY Group. I heard that BGY Group has been in contact with your company for the past few years. This way, it'll be more convenient for you to talk while looking at the architectural models." "Are BGY's people here as well?" "That's right. For an exhibition like this to be held in Jing City, a large property company like BGY will definitely have a spot." Jean Wan nodded and walked in. Today's exhibition was mostly about the physical models of various landmarks in the country, as well as some buildings that sold particularly well and had referential prices. In the exhibition hall, there was a huge map with the names of each city and model marked. Among them there were 4 models in High City. Shine Group currently did not specialize in the real estate industry. Although Mo Jingshan was also invited, Shine Group's buildings were not among the models. Instead, there were 2 from BGY Group and 2 from High City's newest real estate companies. MN Group's buildings were also not among them. This thing was actually a representation, nothing more than an exhibition and introduction. After Jean Wan went in, she greeted several familiar people from High City. Xiaohu pointed her to the seats that had been arranged. She nodded and walked over there. When she first arrived, she did not pay much attention to the people nearby. All of a sudden she heard a familiar male voice. "Jean Wan?" She couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She turned around abruptly and saw Mr. Vince, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, walking to the seat next to her with Secretary Yang, who was always with him. Jean Wan looked at Mr. Vince and then at his seat, which was next to hers. "Jean Wan, this was the seat arranged by Xiaohu? He was innocent, wasn't he?" If Mo Jingshan were to find out, she wasn't sure if Xiaohu would still be able to keep his job. "Why are you in Jing City?" Before Jean Wan could speak, Mr. Vince had seen the nameplate of the seat next to his and turned to look at her, asking at the same time. I'm here on a business trip. I've been in Jing City for several days. Haven't you been back to High City recently?" Jean Wan sat down first. Seeing that she had sat down, Mr. Vince gave a faint smile, motioned for Secretary Yang to go to his seat, and then sat in the seat closest to Jean Wan. I haven't been back to High City for some time. I received an exhibition notice in Jing City, so I flew over early this morning. Mr. Vince said as he opened the bottle of mineral water on the table for her and handed it to her. I haven't seen you for some time. How have you been? If someone else had asked this question, it would have been a polite greeting, but coming from Mr. Vince's mouth, Jean Wan knew that he really wanted to ask how she was doing recently. She took the water and smiled. I'm fine. I've been busy these days, so I fell asleep as soon as I went back to the hotel. I slept well at night and was in good spirits during the day. The new projects and collaborations I've been talking about have all gone well. Hearing her words, Mr. Vince smiled. Why do you look so pale? Jean Wan noticed that Mr. Vince's face was thinner and paler than before. A few days ago, I had a gathering with some old classmates who came back from abroad. I haven't had a gathering for many years. It's rare for us to get together, so I drank too much and hurt my stomach. It's all right. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Mr. Vince smiled mildly because of her relationship with him. After all, I'm no longer a young man in my teens or 20s. I'm in my 30s. I should control my drinking. Otherwise, it's easy for me to drink too much and hurt my body. Hearing that he hurt his stomach because of drinking, Jean Wan couldn't help but be slightly surprised. I always thought you could hold your liquor well. Yes, I could. Mr. Vince smiled. But no matter how good your drinking capacity is, you can't try mixing red, white, and beer all night without stopping? Jean Wan nodded. I don't dare to try that. You know, no matter how good my drinking capacity was when I was in London, I can't even hold 2 bottles of wine. If I mix white and red, I'll probably collapse after a few glasses. Mr. Vince chuckled. You better forget it. There's no need for a girl to drink so much. Usually, you secretly pour away a lot at the table. Don't think I didn't see it. There were several times when Jean Wan met Mr. Vince at the table, but she didn't expect him to see all of her little actions. She couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like I need to practice my technique of secretly pouring wine. You saw it, so did everyone else. If everyone knows it and I still pretend to drink to my heart's content, how awkward would that be? As she spoke, Xiao Hu approached from behind. The seat Xiao Hu had arranged for him was right behind Jean Wan. He noticed that Jean Wan and this BGY representative were chatting happily and seemed to be very familiar with each other. When they were chatting, their bodies were leaning closer to each other, as though they were whispering with their heads lowered. Chapter 578. Usually COG would never take the initiative to lean so close to COMO, nor did she smile so warmly. However, she appeared to be chatting passionately with this BGY's general manager. He did not hear what COG said, but all Xiao Hu saw from behind was the two of them smiling at each other. COG ah. Xiao Hu suddenly stood up, tilting his head forward to say, COMO said that after the exhibition ends, I'll send you to his place. Tonight, you can return to the hotel together. Jean Wan paused at Xiao Hu's abrupt words. She turned to glance at Xiao Hu, but Xiao Hu immediately retracted his head and returned to his original seat with a vexed expression. Was it wrong to arrange for COG to be with BGY's people? Mr. Vince heard the words of the person behind Jean Wan and maintained a faint smile on his face. He did not speak and lowered his head to open another bottle of mineral water. Mo Jingshan was also in Jing City? Returning to the hotel together? After opening the bottle, Mr. Vince placed the bottle on the table and did not speak further. However, his forehead suddenly felt a cool and soft touch. He paused, watching Jean Wan, who had suddenly placed her hand on his forehead. Jean Wan's hand was not cold, but when it was placed on his forehead, it felt slightly cold. I already said that your complexion doesn't look too good. Not only is your stomach not feeling well, you're also running a fever, aren't you? Are you working despite your illness? The woman's hand was soft as though it had no bones. She placed it on his forehead for a while before placing it down. Mr. Vince sat in his original position without moving or speaking. There seemed to be a lingering sensation on his forehead. Jean Wan first touched her own bag. I don't have the habit of carrying cold medicine or fever medicine with me. Did your secretary bring it? Doesn't the secretary know that you're running a fever? It's quite hot to the touch. Mr. Vince's gaze paused on her face. His eyes, which had become much lighter due to Mo Jingshan's presence, continuously darkened and deepened bit by bit. Jean Wan didn't notice his strangeness and was still concerned about his physical condition. You can't work when you're sick. A few days ago when I wasn't feeling well, I tried to rest in the hotel. I occasionally came out for a walk, but I often sat down. When the exhibition is over, go back to rest. Don't neglect your health. When I arrived in Beijing this morning, I felt uncomfortable and sleepy as soon as I got off the plane. If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have realized that I had a fever." Mr. Vince smiled. "It's okay. I'll go back early after I'm done here. Don't worry." Jinwan nodded. Seeing that a grown man like him would not be affected by a fever, she did not speak further. She signaled with her eyes for him to pick up the bottle of mineral water he had just opened on the table to drink. Her meaning was for him to drink more water. Drinking more water during a fever would help him sweat. When the exhibition began, Jinwan watched and listened for a while. She felt that it was pointless and inadvertently noticed that Mr. Vince had been watching intently the entire time. He did not have any relationship with any of BGY's senior management. He had relied solely on his education and years of work experience to secure his position as the general manager. It was clear how dedicated he was. She picked up her phone and glanced at it. She recalled that she had previously added Qin Sighting on WeChat. However, after the previous incident, it was inappropriate for her to directly ask Qin Sighting about it. Thus, she decided to post a message in her circle of friends. "Will stomach discomfort cause a fever? Is the situation serious?" After sending the message, she placed her phone down. Several minutes later, she remembered and picked up her phone to take a look. There were several comments. Several employees and Xiao Ba in the company were asking if her stomach was uncomfortable and if it was serious. Xia Tian sent a bunch of question marks. "What's wrong with you?" Qin Sighting's comment was at the bottom. "Gastroenteritis can indeed cause a fever. Usually it refers to acute gastroenteritis. There will be symptoms of fever and vomiting. It needs to be treated with antibiotics and related drugs. It's not a serious illness, but if it causes a fever, it means that the inflammation is serious. It's best to be hospitalized for treatment." Jinwan replied to him, smiley face, "Worship, as expected of a doctor. The way you speak is like Baidu Wikipedia." However, just as Jinwan lowered her head to look at the comments, Xiao Hu, who was seated at the back, was already bombarded by his boss's phone call. "Hello, COMO." Xiao Hu trembled as he answered the call. He did not know why COMO would suddenly call him when he was busy. "Jinwan's stomach is uncomfortable? And she has a fever?" Mo Jingshan asked. "No." Xiao Hu was dumbfounded. He raised his eyes to look at Jinwan, who was currently scrolling through her phone with her head lowered. She pursed her lips and appeared to be fine. "COG seems to be in good condition. She doesn't seem sick at all." Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. He suddenly asked in a heavy voice, "Who's by her side right now?" "There aren't many people. They're all big bosses from various companies who were invited to the exhibition hall today." Xiao Hu's words were somewhat vague. He was unsure if this BGY's general manager was familiar with COG. He was unsure if he had arranged this seat wrongly. After hesitating for a long time, he finally said, "The person in front of her is the manager of the exhibition hall. Behind her is me. To her left is the manager of a real estate company called Lu Cheng, which has a partnership with MN Group. To her right is the manager of BGY Group, which has a partnership with MN Group." Mo Jingshan had just left the meeting hall. When he heard the words Biju, his footsteps paused. He raised his head to look at the parking lot in the distance, narrowing his eyes as he coldly spoke. "BGY's manager? Their local general manager, Vince?" "Oh, that's right. COMO, didn't you not come? How did you know?" Xiao Hu felt a chill run down his spine from Mo Jingshan's tone. "But it seems like Mr. Vince is the one who isn't feeling well. It seems like his mental state isn't very good." Mo Jingshan's expression did not reveal anything. He only calmly said, "I'll be there in a moment." "All right, COMO." After hanging up, Mo Jingshan opened up Jinwan's circle of friends. He saw that the night before yesterday, Qin Sighting had added Jinwan after discovering their WeChat contacts. He then saw Jinwan's reply. "Very good." The first post was related to a man, but it was posted for another man. Below it was her interaction with another man. Mo Jingshan read Jinwan's post over and over again. He then read her conversation with Qin Sighting over and over again. His brows furrowed, and his expression became increasingly expressionless. Chapter 579. Seeing Qin Sighting's comment, Jinwan knew that he was not busy right now and had time to talk, so she sent a message to Qin Sighting and asked him about the gastroenteritis and fever. Then she said a few polite words. She put down the phone. Less than half an hour later, Mo Jingshan called. She had not saved Mo Jingshan's number in her contacts. She had not saved it since she returned to China. Jinwan looked at the number on her phone that she had memorized without saving it in her contacts and picked it up. The man's voice came through. Is the exhibition over? Not yet. It'll probably be another hour. And? Jinwan heard his tone again and glanced at the quiet crowd around her. She lowered her voice to say, "It's not convenient for me to answer the phone here. Did you call just to tell me, N?" The man said indifferently, "Look ahead to the right." Jinwan paused and raised her eyes to look in the direction he pointed. She first saw the exhibition stand and then turned to the right. All of a sudden, she saw a man dressed in a black suit standing in the unobtrusive resting area by the side of the exhibition stand. Jinwan, when did this man come over? Didn't he say that he had a meeting today, so he asked Xiaohu to accompany her here and look for him later? Why did he come to the exhibition hall? Since Mo Jingshan was standing there, it was clear that the people here recognized him and did not dare to stop him. However, there were no seats here, so they opened the door by the side of the stand and let him sit there so that he could look at the exhibition stand from a close distance. However, it was clear that the man had no intention of looking at the exhibition stand. Instead, he indifferently looked in her direction through the small crowd. Most importantly, the man's expression was not very good. Especially when he saw Mr. Vince, who was sitting next to her slightly because he was not feeling well and his head was almost leaning toward her, Mo Jingshan's expression became even colder and more indifferent. Sensing that Jinwan was sitting next to him, Mr. Vince, who was originally fine, suddenly seemed to have a slight change in his mood. Mr. Vince was the closest to her. As Mo Jingshan was standing behind the lights, he could not see him clearly without looking carefully. He only glanced at the exhibition stand and then turned to look at her. "What are you looking at?" Jinwan's expression was calm. "Nothing." She felt that he seemed a little weak just now, so she turned her eyes and said, "I just asked a friend who is a doctor. He said that it's best to go to the hospital for a fever caused by gastroenteritis. If it's serious, you'll have to be treated in the hospital for 2 days. You can't force yourself like this." Mr. Vince smiled faintly. "Well, if it's not done in 2 days, I'll go and take a look. You're already running a fever and you still want to wait until you're done. You'd better go there after we leave the exhibition hall." Mo Jingshan stood in the distance. Seeing Jinwan whispering to the man next to her and speaking very seriously, his face gradually darkened. From the moment he came in, he saw the two of them sitting together. The little woman who usually frowned at him often smiled at the man who often went to London for the past 3 years to make his presence known in front of her. She had even posted a post on her WeChat moments just for this man. The exhibition had reached an important period. The person on stage had also reached an important part. Jinwan's gaze returned to the exhibition stand. She did not look at anyone. After she finished looking through this part of the exhibition, the models and pictures on the display stand and the large screen in front of her had all been changed. She lowered her eyes to look at her phone. After looking at her hand for a while, she seemed to remember that Mo Jingshan had come earlier. She raised her eyes again, only to see that the man who had been standing in the dark by the side of the exhibition stand had disappeared. Jinwan's gaze faltered. Did he leave because he had something to do? She retracted her gaze and continued to look at the exhibition stand. After several minutes, the person in charge of Lu Qing Group, who was sitting on her left, stood up to go to the restroom. Several minutes later, someone returned and sat by her side. Jinwan did not pay much attention to it at first because the lighting in the exhibition hall was dim. However, she suddenly felt a sense of familiarity by her side. It also carried a clear and heavy aura, causing her to abruptly turn her head. She first lowered her eyes to see a pair of long legs dressed in black trousers. Her gaze then moved up bit by bit. She saw a black shirt and a suit jacket casually placed by the side. She continued moving up to see a shirt with 2 or 3 buttons undone. A man's seductive collarbone, Adam's apple, and a well-defined and incomparably handsome chin. When she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, Jinwan instantly pursed her lips. She could not help but look in the direction beside him and then in another direction. Her expression was strange. Isn't this the seat of the person in charge of Lu Qing Group? You sit here. When he comes back, where should he sit? Seeing her slow reaction and the fact that she could not find the main topic on him, Mo Jingshan was expressionless. You're really concerned about a lot of people. I've asked someone to arrange a VIP seat for him in the front row. Jinwan made an "oh" sound and retracted her gaze. She continued to look at the exhibition stand and did not pay him any attention. The surroundings were very quiet. Everyone was basically whispering a few words before continuing to listen patiently to the explanation on the exhibition stand. Mo Jingshan did not speak further and only sat by Jinwan's side. All of a sudden Jean Wan's right hand was covered by a hand. She turned to look at Mr. Vince, who was seated to her right. Mr. Vince leaned over and whispered into her ear, "Look at the model on display right now. It's the overall concept model of several European-style villas that BGY plans to introduce nationwide this year. Our company plans to promote this type of residential area in various cities. What do you think of the design of these villas?" Mr. Vince was not trying to take advantage of her. He had only placed his hand on Jean Wan's hand to attract her attention. She tried to draw her attention back, but when he saw that Jean Wan's hand did not move away, nor did she make any movements to push him away, Mr. Vince did not move his hand away and continued to place it on hers as though it was natural. Jean Wan's gaze shifted to the new set of architectural models and detailed drawings on the screen that Mr. Vince had mentioned. She found them somewhat familiar. Weren't these the architectural models of BGY's luxurious villas that many wealthy people in the country had been particularly fond of in recent years? She did not expect that BGY would only begin to promote and design these now. She felt as though she had stepped onto a point in history. Jean Wan smiled. Before she could speak, she abruptly felt the air pressure on her left drop to the point where many people around her felt as though they were about to freeze. Chapter 580. When Mo Jingshin spoke, the anger on his face was unprecedentedly clear, and anyone could see that he was angry. Hearing this, Jean Wan immediately wanted to take her hand back, but she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her wrist. She turned to look at the man who had pulled her wrist out first and met his black eyes. His eyes, which were usually deep and indifferent, were now a deep sea of fire. He stared at her as if to burn her, and every line of his face was tense. It was clear that he was angry and enduring. Jean Wan had never seen Mo Jingshin so directly angry, nor did she see him angry. It was almost the first time that he was so angry. Her heart shrank slightly and she frowned. "It hurts?" Mo Jingshin looked at her wrinkled face and realized how hard he had held her wrist just now. He let go of her wrist, but his face was expressionless and cold as if ice was about to form. Mr. Vince was not feeling well today, so his attention was not as sharp as usual. When Jean Wan vaguely said the word, "It hurts," he turned to look at the man on the other side of her. The two men looked at each other. One was slightly startled and the other was cold and indifferent. There was an indescribable undercurrent in their eyes at the same time. Jean Wan was talking to Mr. Vince. Because he was not feeling well today, she leaned closer to him to avoid his voice being lower than usual. Besides, he was just talking to her about the building models, so she was only slightly sensitive to the hand that suddenly covered hers. However, because she felt that Mr. Vince was having a fever and his palm was obviously hot, she hesitated and did not move her hand away. It had only been less than a minute since their hands touched. She didn't expect that Mo Jingshin, who was usually expressionless, would be clearly angry. "Xiaomo?" Mr. Vince spoke first. When he saw that Mo Jingshin had sat down next to Jean Wan, he understood what was going on. However, Jean Wan's concern for him just now made him want to give up again. He suddenly made up his mind to cut off all means of retreat. Even if the person he had to fight against was Mo Jingshin, he didn't intend to give up so easily. So Mr. Vince's voice sounded polite, but it was full of emotions that only Mo Jingshin could understand. Now he knew that the relationship between Jean Wan and Mo Jingshin had not recovered to that extent. He wouldn't say anything about what happened in Yuehu Bay, but since Jean Wan hadn't remarried him or made up with him, it meant that he still had a chance. Mo Jingshin didn't speak, not even a word of response, but just glanced at him indifferently. The two men sitting next to her were both about 1.8 meters tall. Their figures were almost perfect, and they were both dressed in expensive and exquisite formal suits. Furthermore, they were both black. Although Mr. Vince's background was slightly simpler, and his status as BGY's general manager was not as shocking as his status as Shine Group's global CEO, he was actually an elite in every aspect. In front of Mo Jingshin, he did not show the slightest bit of timidity. The two men both exuded a cold and aloof aura. More importantly, the two men sat on her left and right, sandwiching her between them. Strangely, Jean Wan felt that her current situation was almost comparable to the Shiraba. In the past few years, the way she interacted with Mr. Vince was not very deliberate. Instead, it was very natural. When she first returned to the country, the person she interacted with the most was Mr. Vince. However, in Mo Jingshin's eyes, this kind of relationship was not the same. Mo Jingshin was the first to indifferently withdraw his gaze. When the guide on the stage announced that the exhibition would end here, he took Jean Wan's hand and stood up to leave. The moment Jean Wan's figure was forced to stand up with him, Mr. Vince said with a faint smile, Shine Group's headquarters is still in Los Angeles. In the past few years, COMO hasn't returned to the country much. This time you seem to have stayed in the country for too long. Is this also moving the company's headquarters back to the country? Mo Jingshan paused and said indifferently, Mo Group's headquarters has been moved back to the country. Why can't Shine Group be moved back? Jinwan? Mo Group? She had clearly changed its name to MN Group, but he actually insisted on calling it Mo. Mr. Vince glanced sideways at Jinwan. Seeing that Jinwan pursed her lips and obviously had no intention of cooperating with Mo Jingshan, he gave a playful smile. Mo? Why do I remember that when she registered the company name in London, her mentor said that she could use her original name, but she insisted on changing it to MN. Originally she wanted to use other letters, but in order to make it easier to remember she used the two letters MN. This has nothing to do with Mo. Jinwan, Mr. Vince was not in High City before. She had thought that he didn't approach her because of Mo Jingshan, but now it seemed that it was not the case. His tone clearly sounded to be against Mo Jingshan, and he had no intention of being suppressed by Mo Jingshan's momentum at all. Jinwan could clearly smell the smoke of gunpowder. Mo Jingshan held Jinwan's hand, put his arm around her waist, and quietly tightened his grip on her waist. He sneered and said calmly, "Do you think Mo doesn't exist just because MN has replaced Mo? A few months ago the British media and the domestic media had interviewed her and asked her about the purpose of MN. She had said that she just wanted to continue the name of her original studio, but had changed it to letters in order to conform to international standards. Was the interview she had given herself more reliable, or was your words worth my time and consideration? Or perhaps you can only find some comfort in these words?" Mr. Vince's face changed slightly and darkened. Mo Jingshan put his arm around her and went out. This time Mr. Vince did not speak again. Jinwan wanted to say something for Mr. Vince, but thinking that he was not evenly matched with Mo Jingshan, she knew that whatever she said now would not do him any good. But before walking out of Mr. Vince's sight, she quietly looked back at him and raised her hand to point to her stomach, reminding him to remember to go to the hospital. Seeing that Jinwan was still winking at Vince, Mo Jingshan took her out of the exhibition hall and let her go. He didn't say a word and didn't even look at her, let alone lower his head to talk to her intimately. Chapter 581. She glanced at him. "We only sat together and chatted. What's wrong with touching hands? Is there a need to be so impolite to me?" The man ignored her and went to the security guard in the parking lot to receive the electronic car key. He asked coldly, "Where did you park it?" The security guard said respectfully, "Sir, your car was parked in parking lot number 208 on the B2 floor." Mo Jingshan went down the stairs of the parking lot. Jinwan turned to look at Xiao Hu who had followed her out. Although Xiao Hu did not understand the situation, he felt that he could not protect himself and did not speak much. When his eyes met Jinwan's he quickly turned his head away. He followed Mo Jingshan's back and called out eagerly, "COMO." When they reached the car, Mo Jingshan sat in the back. Even after Jinwan got into the car, he did not acknowledge her or look her in the eye. He lowered his head to pick up the documents on the back seat and read through them. His expression was still cold and unpleasant. He did not speak, nor did Jinwan. The man's slender fingers flipped through the documents in his hands, treating her as though she did not exist. Xiao Hu glanced at the time as he drove and then boldly spoke up in the overly quiet atmosphere in the car. "COMO, the exhibition ended early this morning. Do you want to continue with your afternoon schedule? Or do you want to return to the hotel? It's already past 12. You and COG haven't had lunch yet. Do you want to find a place to eat first?" "All right." Jinwan readily agreed. Coincidentally, she was hungry. The man did not move his eyes. He indifferently watched her expression as though she was in high spirits the moment she heard that they were going to eat. He coldly said, "Whatever." Seeing that he was willing to speak, Jinwan finally turned to look at him. "Are we going to eat Chinese food or Western food?" Mo Jingshan silently watched her calm expression as though nothing had happened. His gaze was cold and he did not say a word. Jinwan very consciously turned her eyes away from him and made a decision. "I've been eating Chinese food for the past few days. I haven't seen any particularly good Chinese food in Jing City. Let's eat Western food today." Seeing that COMO did not speak, Xiao Hu continued to drive in search of a good Western restaurant nearby. When they arrived at the restaurant, Jinwan handed the menu to them to order. Mo Jingshan tossed the menu to Xiao Hu, asking him to order. Xiao Hu continued to tremble. Well, COMO, although I understand your taste, I really don't know COG's taste very well. Why don't you two order some? Jinwan had no intention of taking the menu. Anyway, she would just eat casually. She gave Xiao Hu a look indicating for him to pass the menu to Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan had no intention of accepting it. The man casually said, "Order whatever you want to eat." I don't even understand how you look at men now, so how would I know what you like to eat? Jinwan, what does that mean? Was he implying that her attitude towards Mr. Vince was slightly better now, and mocking her for her poor taste in men? Xiao Hu, was Mo jealous? Today's seat was arranged. It's relatively close, and Mr. Vince has taken good care of me these past few years. There's nothing wrong with talking to him. Furthermore, Mr. Vince has pursued me for more than 3 years. We're both adults and there's nothing between us. At most we'll touch hands and talk. Is there a need for me to be so unreasonable? Mo Jingshan silently watched her, his gaze cold. Xiao Hu had already slowly stood up. He felt that this topic was not suitable for him to listen to and softly said, "I'm going to the bathroom." After speaking, he disappeared as though his feet had been smeared with oil. The waiter by the side was slightly awkward. He politely asked, "Miss, what would you like to order?" In such situations, men would usually give in to women, so he was used to asking the woman directly. Jinwan glanced at the menu. She did not wish to continue occupying the waiter's time and casually ordered a few dishes. The waiter politely took the menu back and turned to leave. Jinwan lowered her head to look at her phone. If he didn't speak, she wouldn't take the initiative to speak. Anyway, she had never seen Mo Jingshan angry before. Even when she was still attached to him in the past, she didn't know how to coax him when he was so seriously angry, let alone now. She didn't plan to coax him at all. If he wanted to be angry, she didn't care. Although she had always maintained the attitude of a friend toward Mr. Vince and had never agreed or flirted with him in the past 3 years, she had always scrupulously abided by her own principles. But in the past 3 years, Mr. Vince had helped her a lot and taken care of her many times. It was all true. In the past 3 years, whenever she encountered difficulties, Mo Jingshan did not appear. He basically left her alone. Even if he was following the trajectory of her life, there were some things he had to let go and let her go on her own. But in the past 3 years, no matter how strong she was, she still received support and help from her friends. When he was not by her side, she was grateful to everyone who helped her, so it was impossible for her to maintain a cold attitude toward Mr. Vince. There was nothing wrong with being concerned about Mr. Vince's health. If Xia Tian wasn't feeling well, she would have been more concerned and even taken Xia Tian to the hospital. Between friends, why couldn't they be concerned? When Xiao Hu came out of the restroom, he saw that the atmosphere at the table seemed to be in a cold war. He hesitated for a long time before returning. However, he tried his best to reduce his presence and did not dare to say that he was the one who arranged the seats for Jinwan and that BGY's general manager. He originally thought that he had kindly arranged a seat for Jinwan beside the business partner, but in the end, he caused such a scene. Seeing that Xiao Hu had returned, Jinwan suddenly stood up. "I'm going to the restroom as well." Xiao Hu coughed by the side. In such an atmosphere, escaping to the toilet was indeed the best method. He rushed to point toward the restroom. "The ladies' room is over there. I think it's on the 2nd floor. The 1st floor is for men." Jinwan nodded. She picked up her bag and phone and turned to leave. Less than a minute after Jinwan left, Mo Jingshan also stood up. Xiao Hu's eyelids twitched. He did not dare to speak and only secretly glanced at COMO. He then saw that COMO also seemed to be heading in that direction. Earlier, when he reminded Jinwan, COMO should have heard it. However, when Xiao Hu's gaze shifted in that direction, he saw his CEO boss casually passing by the men's restroom. His long legs took a step up the stairs to the 2nd floor. Chapter 582. Jinwan didn't go to the bathroom. She just wanted to stay away from the Cold War. She washed her hands and touched up her makeup. After about 10 minutes, she turned around and was about to go out, but when she walked out of the door, she suddenly saw the man leaning against the wall and smoking outside. As soon as she went out, she was surrounded by a cloud of smoke. She paused for a moment and watched the man smoking. Unlike other men, Mo Jingshan looked calmer and steadier when he smoked. Even though there was smoke around him, it didn't smell unacceptable. Instead, it smelled faintly of mint. But why did he come here to smoke? The men's bathroom was downstairs and this was the women's bathroom. She hadn't moved since she came out. She just stood on the spot and looked at him. The man also glanced at her when she walked out. The sparks between his fingers flickered. He didn't stop because she saw him, but he didn't do anything deliberately. The two of them just stood there silently and smoked silently. When Mo Jingshan put out the cigarette butt and threw it aside, Jinwan asked, "You don't seem to smoke much before." "Yes," the man said flatly. "Have you smoked often in the past 3 years?" "Occasionally." Jinwan didn't speak anymore. After all, when she was downstairs, the man's face was cold. Now she just came out to the bathroom, but he followed her. On the one hand, she felt she did nothing wrong, but on the other hand, she didn't know what to say or do. The man glanced at the bathroom behind her. "Is there anyone else in there?" "No." Jinwan was indeed alone in there just now. The man looked at her again, suddenly stood up from leaning against the wall, and then, before Jinwan could react, he took a step towards her. His approach was so oppressive that she instinctively took a few steps back into the bathroom. When the man also came in, her eyes froze. "This is the women's bathroom." Before she finished speaking, the door of the bathroom was closed by the man. "Jinwan?" The man was still approaching. She looked at him strangely and stepped back step by step until she leaned against the sink. "Mo Jingshan, are you trying to be a hooligan in the ladies' room?" Jinwan placed her hands behind her back, between her waist and the marble sink. Seeing that the man did not speak and only looked at her, it was as if he wanted to see through her and see what she was thinking through his almost compelling gaze. Jinwan turned her head away slightly, saying unhappily, "Weren't you still angry with me earlier? Are you still going to have a cold war with me? What is this now?" "Well, I'm not angry now." The man's tone was light, but he still didn't retreat. Jinwan immediately glanced at him. "Why aren't you angry? You were inexplicably angry and then inexplicably dispelled. Some emotions come without reason, and it's true that I can't control them," the man said. "But if I continue to be angry, it doesn't seem to be good for me." Jinwan's expression was cold. "As expected, you're astonishingly calm in the face of everything. Even at a time like this, you can still consider the pros and cons. What can I do if I don't consider it? With your current temper, you don't even know how to coax people. I might not be able to pull you back. If I push you away again, I'm afraid you'll only jump further." The man's tone sounded light and indifferent, but he seemed a little aggrieved. Why was he aggrieved? Because she didn't coax him? How childish was this Mo Jingshan? But then again, her current words and actions were indeed very much according to her own temperament, and she was the kind that had no scruples at all. Jinwan didn't speak but raised her hand to push his chest, then put her hand on his body and said coldly, "Speaking of the story in the bathroom, I still remember that time in the bar before the divorce because I was flirting with those men on the dance floor. You directly dragged me into the men's bathroom. I was so angry that I pressed you against the wall and grabbed your shirt collar. Do you remember what you said to me at that time?" The man's brows moved. He didn't say anything, but he clearly remembered the shameless things he had said and done back then. "You said, 'You think you can hold me down?'" Jinwan's voice was light, and then she raised her eyebrows and slightly hooked her fingers to the collar of his shirt. She then gave a cold smile. "Mo Jingshan, do you think you can hold me down now?" With that, she was about to push the man away deadpan. However, the man didn't push her away. Instead, he easily raised his hand to hold her wrist, put his other arm around her waist and buckled her into his arms. When Jinwan was surprised, he bent his head and chuckled. "Of course I can. Jinwan?" This was not the script. Then, the man pressed her against the marble sink and held the back of her head with the hand that was around her waist. He leaned down and kissed her fiercely. This kiss seemed to be mixed with the anger that hadn't dissipated, showing that he was not as calm as he seemed. This kiss was impatient and aggressive. Jinwan leaned against the sink and suddenly wanted to resist. She raised her leg and was about to kick the man's leg, but the man pressed her leg under the sink with his strong, straight long leg and she couldn't move at all. "You? Mo Jingshan, you? Shin." Jinwan wriggled in his arms angrily. Mo Jingshan held her waist and deepened the kiss. From the initial aggression, it gradually softened and became a lingering kiss. While she was catching her breath, he pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely, "A kiss can at least ease my anger. You don't want me to keep this anger until tonight, do you?" Tonight? She had been too busy these days. It was rare that Mo Jingshan didn't enter her room after she returned to the hotel and told her to have a good rest. Did he have any plans now? Jinwan rolled her eyes and bit the man's lips harshly. The man felt pain on his lips, but he didn't let go of her. It wasn't until both of them tasted blood that he withdrew from her mouth and looked down at her with a faint smile. "You bit me so hard. It seems you're looking forward to tonight, N?" There was a bit of blood on the man's lips, and there was a small wound that she had bitten at such a close distance. However, the visual effect was so damn sexy. Jean Wan raised her hand to cover her red and swollen mouth, forbidding him to continue kissing her lips. Chapter 583. She subconsciously wanted him to find a door to hide in, but the man in front of her seemed not to hear the knock on the door. He still held her in his arms and did not move further. He just kissed her on the cheek again. Then he let go of her, turned around and went to open the door. Outside the door, there were two young girls who were in a hurry to enter the restroom. When they saw the man coming out, they were startled. However, the man was too handsome, and the two girls immediately swallowed their screams. They looked at the back of the man in disbelief. Even though he had just walked out of the women's restroom, he was still calm as if he had just casually strolled in a supermarket. Oh my God, he's so handsome. Shouldn't we be questioning why he went into the washroom? What if he's a pervert? Should we call the police? Call the police? How could such a handsome man be a pervert? Maybe he's just a toilet repairman? Have you ever seen a toilet repairman wear such an expensive shirt? Jean Wan, who had just been pressed against the sink and kissed by the toilet repairman in the bathroom. Jean Wan didn't return to the hotel in the afternoon. She had an itinerary that had been booked in the afternoon. She had been in Beijing for several days. Although MN Group didn't have many domestic partners in Beijing, there were many big shots in Beijing these days, and inevitably some of them would come here, so she had made a few last-minute appointments to meet them for business talks and social engagements. After lunch, Xiao Hu sent Jean Wan to the workplace. Jean Wan asked Xiao Hu to go back first and call him to pick her up after finishing work in the evening. But when she finished work, it was still not dark, and Jean Wan had no intention of contacting Xiao Hu. Fortunately, she had been careful these days and brought all her documents and things with her. It was very convenient to change hotels. The only inconvenience was that her luggage was still in the room of Xingtang Hotel, but it didn't matter. She could just call a nearby shopping mall to send her a few sets of clothes. So, the man who forced Jean Wan to the sink in the restaurant's bathroom at noon and repeatedly said the word evening, with deep meaning, didn't see her return until it was dark. After 7 o'clock in the evening, it was dark and the lights were on in Beijing. Mo Jingshan took the documents that Xiao Hu handed to him as he walked and was about to return to his room when he suddenly paused and turned to look at the closed door of the unoccupied room opposite him. His dark eyes slowly narrowed. He had a hunch. This woman probably wouldn't come back tonight. Less than half an hour later, Mo Jingshan's hunch came true. Xiao Hu had just received a call, saying that Jean Wan had booked a room in a 6-star hotel 5 miles away from Xingtang Hotel, and it was a suite with perfect security facilities and other aspects. The door could be double-locked from the inside. Even if someone had the room card from the outside, they couldn't get in. After hearing Xiao Hu's trembling report, Mo Jingshan's expression did not change at all. He only calmly placed the document in his hand on the table by the side, his tone unhurried. Very good. After checking into a new hotel, a new room, and carrying 2 sets of new clothes that she had just ordered from the mall, Jean Wan breathed in the relaxed and free air as soon as she entered the room. She threw herself onto the bed, feeling that even the smell of disinfectant on the hotel bed was so lovely. Nowadays, many hotels didn't allow too many locking functions inside because in recent years, many lawbreakers had done bad things in hotels, and there were often coma cases and murder cases. If there were too many locking functions inside, once something happened, the hotel staff wouldn't be able to detect too much, and they wouldn't be able to rescue them in time, so most hotels just locked the door or opened the door with a room card. In some particularly high-end hotels, a room card could solve all the locks inside and outside, such as Xingtang Hotel. It was useless for her to lock the door from the inside. If it weren't for the important work that had been added to her schedule these days, she would probably have flown back to High City. This hotel was found by her people nearby. It was not very far from Xingtang Hotel, only 5 miles away. If she really had to go to work with Mo Jingshan, it wouldn't take too long. It was rare to find such a good environment, advanced, well-equipped 6-star hotel that could be locked from the inside. As soon as she entered the door, she felt very relaxed. In the past few days, most of her schedule was with Mo Jingshan, so she had to stay in Xingtang Hotel. But from today on, she had basically figured out the schedule for the next few days. She still had to work alone most of the time, so there was no reason to continue to be tied to him. And the window of this hotel room was facing a famous lake in Jing City, and there was a medium-sized balcony outside the window. Jean Wan stood up, pushed open the window and walked to the balcony. The sky had already darkened, and the headlights of the cars on the main street below the hotel were dazzling. The wind in Jing City was stronger and drier than in Hai City, causing the hem of her clothes to flutter. Jinwan stood on the balcony and looked up at the night sky immersed in dark clouds. She felt that it would be mostly rainy in Jing City these days. Her cell phone on the bed rang. Seeing it was raining, Jinwan turned back to the window, closed it and walked back to the bed. The message was naturally from Mo Jingshan. And this man sent her a WeChat message for the first time in her 2 lives. This was probably the first time in her 2 lives that Boss Missouri had used WeChat. However, the WeChat message he sent was just a short 2-second voice message. Jinwan clicked on it and heard the man's low voice. Escaped? Jinwan was expressionless after hearing this. She glanced at the 2-second voice message in her hand, put the cell phone aside, picked up the new clothes she had bought, and went into the bathroom to take a shower. In the Xingtang Hotel 5 miles away, the man sat in front of an empty room with only a 30-inch suitcase leaning against the wall, looking at his cell phone that had been quiet for a long time. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and looked down at the chat interface on the cell phone. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, she didn't reply? After leaving his sight, she began to return to her original appearance? Just as Mo Jingshan was about to put the cell phone down with a dark face, the cell phone suddenly vibrated in his hand, and there came the sound of a WeChat message. Chapter 584. Qin sighting. I've tolerated your profile picture for days. Why haven't you changed it yet? Mo Jingshan glanced at Qin sighting's disdainful tone and didn't reply. Then Qin sighting sent another message. I really don't mean to criticize you, but aren't you being too obvious by using Jinwan's photo as your profile picture? Mo Jingshan replied expressionlessly. Do you have a problem with that? Qin sighting. Of course I don't have a problem with that. But I wonder if Jinwan will have a problem with that. Will she tolerate your increasingly shameless side? Mo Jingshan stared coldly at Qin sighting's sarcastic words. He suddenly remembered that a few years ago, Qin sighting had said on the phone that if there came a day when he, Mo Jingshan, wanted to find Jinwan but couldn't find her, he would stab him in the heart with a knife and let him have a taste of the pain of being stabbed by his brother when he couldn't say anything. Mo Jingshan still didn't reply. However, a few minutes later, Qin sighting sent a screenshot of a WeChat chat. The screenshot was the chat between Qin sighting and Jinwan 2 minutes ago. Qin sighting, today you asked about gastroenteritis. Whose stomach is uncomfortable? Jinwan replied instantly, a friend. Qin sighting, so fast? Shouldn't you be resting at this time? Jinwan, I just took a shower and am lying in bed looking at my cell phone. I'll sleep in a minute. Qin sighting, didn't you go to Beijing on a business trip? Not with Mo Jingshan? Jinwan, no. Qin sighting, laughing, very good. Mo Jingshan looked at the few messages that Jinwan replied almost instantly on the screenshot, and his face gradually became indescribably gloomy. Assassin Qin, you've taken her to Jing City but you haven't settled it yet. I think Jinwan has long given up on love and doesn't love you at all. You'd better let go of her and let her find another man to marry. Anyway, you're the one who let go of her first. Smile, cute smile, laughing. Seeing that Mo Jingshan didn't reply, Qin sighting had a hunch in his heart. He casually sent an emoji and sure enough he replied with an exclamation mark, saying that he was not Mo Jingshan's friend and needed to be verified as a friend. Mo Jingshan, who was as calm as a god in times of trouble, also became angry out of shame. It seemed like he was right. Thinking of Mo Jingshan's current situation, and then thinking of the scene when he saw Jinwan standing like a ghost in the hospital corridor in Los Angeles. Although it was his own brother who was suffering from retribution, it was still an inexplicable pleasure. Jinwan had a very good sleep and felt very secure. When she woke up and opened her eyes, it was already past 8 o'clock in the morning. She had an appointment at around 10 o'clock in the morning which was nearby, so she was not in a hurry. She picked up her phone and glanced at it. It had been a quiet night. She then put down her phone, took a shower, changed her clothes, combed her hair and put on makeup. After he was done with everything he was about to go out when Xiao Hu called. COG, it's almost time for the schedule you arranged this morning. Shall I drive you there? Xiao Hu's tone was a little tentative. After all, Jinwan had stayed in another hotel last night. Right now he did not know how Jinwan was doing. There's no need. I'm very close to the place. If I take the subway it's only a few stops away. I'll take the subway. Xiao Hu, okay then tonight. Xiao Hu originally wanted to ask Jinwan if she wanted to go back to Xingtang Hotel tonight. After all, on the night she moved to another hotel, Mo stayed in her room all night and had not come out yet. However, before Xiao Hu said this, he suddenly saw the door of the room next to him open. Mo Jingshan was still dressed in the same clothes as last night, but there were no wrinkles on his clothes. It seemed that he had not slept all night. After coming out, he did not speak but looked at him indifferently. Xiao Hu immediately choked back his words, briefly told Jin Wan about her schedule in the next few days, and was about to hang up the phone. However, just before he hung up the phone, he suddenly heard Jin Wan say, "If it's convenient, please find time to send my suitcase here tonight. After all, my computer and some other things are in the suitcase." Xiao Hu didn't know whether he should agree or not, so he vaguely agreed and hung up the phone. Then he looked up at his boss's calm eyes. Cog just said that she would take the subway to the workplace today. Mo Jingshan didn't speak. Although he had not slept all night, his face was not tired, his eyes were cold and clear, and he said nothing. Xiao Hu felt that the atmosphere was a bit oppressive, so he immediately smiled to ease his embarrassment, saying, "The traffic jam in Beijing is quite serious. If you don't drive, it's indeed more convenient to take the subway." He looked at the man whose expression did not change at all, thought for a while and said, "In addition, Cog asked me to send her suitcase tonight. Mo, should I send it to her?" "Yes," Mo Jingshan said indifferently. Before Xiao Hu could see his boss's face, he had turned back to the room. That night, when Jin Wan returned to the hotel, she saw that her big suitcase had been sent by Xiao Hu and was placed in the front desk on the first floor of the hotel. When the staff saw her, they took the initiative to push the suitcase to her. However, not only the suitcase, but also Mo Jingshan, who had been waiting in the hotel's VIP lounge, was also sent here. Knowing that Mo Jingshan was here, Jin Wan didn't say anything and went to the VIP lounge under the guidance of the staff. When she walked over, the door in front of her was just opened by the staff and Jin Wan walked in. Their eyes met, and Mo Jingshan's dark eyes fell on the woman's face. Watching Jin Wan push her suitcase and walk in so casually, he didn't look away for a long time. Jin Wan glanced at him indifferently. She was not surprised that he would appear here, but she just glanced at him as if nothing had happened and didn't linger. The staff very sensibly walked out, leaving them some space, but the spacious room also fell into silence for no reason. Jin Wan gently held the handle of the suitcase and casually glanced at the environment of the lounge. Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on her face without any emotion, but he didn't look away. She suddenly turned back and was caught off guard by the man's deep eyes. They looked at each other for a few seconds. She smiled. Mo Jingshan indifferently raised his eyelids. After this woman escaped from his encirclement, her tone began to carry the sound of alienation. These days, whenever she was forced to call out Mo Jingshan's full name in anger, the delicate and lovely tone she showed was drowned out by the sense of distance emanating from her bones. The feeling of being stabbed in the heart last night had faded, but Jin Wan clearly had no intention of explaining why she ran away from him and ignored his message. She even seemed to take it for granted. Her cat claws, which she had hidden, were indeed very sharp once they were revealed. Chapter 585. Mo Jingshan didn't speak, so Jin Wan didn't speak. But she couldn't keep wasting time like this. Jin Wan had just come back from outside. Today she squeezed all her work into one day, trying to finish all the social engagements in 2 or 3 days, and then return to High City as soon as possible. At this moment she was a little tired and didn't have the energy to deal with too many things. She said lightly, "For the next few days I will complete my work in Jing City as scheduled. I will not miss a single thing. As for the few itineraries that I have to travel with you, I have already told Xiao Hu. If the timing is right I will go. If not, then we will go our separate ways." She looked at the man who remained calm and said with a smile, "After all, Xingtang Hotel is a hotel invested by your company and many partners will also go there. It's really suitable for you to live there, but I'm different. I've hung out with you in the upper class of the Beijing circle for so many days and met all kinds of big shots. Now it's time for me to go back to my original work. It doesn't matter where I live. After the trip I'll go back to High City." Jin Wan. She smiled. Mo Jingshan looked straight into her eyes, and his voice was indifferent and cold as if he wanted to see the deepest part of her heart. "You really don't love me anymore?" Jin Wan paused and then slowly smiled. However, the man on the sofa kept looking at her quietly, and she couldn't smile anymore but just smiled. If it could be said that she had truly loved him deeply when they went through life and death together in Cambodia, if it could be said that she had stubbornly insisted on staying by his side when he wanted to divorce her, even when he scolded her for being a bitch, then it could be said that she had truly loved him to the point where she had no regrets. But she also knew how she had felt when she signed the divorce papers and how she had survived the past 3 years. She remembered the day when she drank all night, stared blankly on the balcony of the hotel all night, and woke up and cut her long hair short. She might be touched or displeased by the fact that Mo Jingshan had an affair with another woman, or perhaps she was just unhappy that someone had taken a fancy to what she once had. This was human nature, but she wasn't sure whether it was love or not. Since even Mo Jingshan could clearly say that she didn't love him anymore, perhaps her attitude was too arbitrary and she had lost the hope of deliberately trying to make up for it. She didn't deliberately avoid him or approach him. Perhaps it was because she didn't spend any more time on him that he said she didn't love him anymore. Then maybe she really didn't love him anymore. Maybe, Jinwan replied after a long time. Why? Jinwan looked at him and suddenly fell into a trance. She then turned her face away and gently placed her hand on the handle of the suitcase, saying softly, "About 3 years ago, the child that had survived in my belly for more than 2 months and gradually began to have a fetal heartbeat was aborted. Perhaps the man I loved the most finally woke up, and my broken heart was frozen overnight. Even though you broke the ice on the surface with a reasonable and even considerate reason, the flesh and blood inside were still numb and cold." Seeing the man's dark eyes, she knew that he was also thinking about the baby, which was a sensitive point for Jinwan, and also for Mo Jingshan, so he often avoided this topic and never mentioned it. There were cars passing by outside the hotel, and not far from the lounge came the low voices of passers-by. Everything behind Jinwan seemed to become an illusory background. Mo Jingshan seemed to see through her indifferent face the woman he saw sitting outside 3 years ago when he woke up, and through the crack in the door of the ward, he saw the pale woman who had been waiting for him all this time. In these 3 years, it was as if she had silently endured everything that she could and could not bear. These 3 years had exploded in her body. She was strong because of the pain, but it was also because of her strength that she had sealed off many things that should have been soft in her heart. She learned to choose gains and losses, learned to bow her head under the eaves, and learned to find opportunities to break out of the cage. She seemed to be compromising, but in fact, the high wall in her heart was not destroyed at all. Jinwan said calmly, "Or maybe it's because I've lived 2 lives, loved madly, tried my best, and finally learned the whole truth. I'm just relieved, but I've already let go of many things that I should cling to. Mo Jingshan, in the past 3 years I've learned one thing, that is, love won't kill people. It will only destroy my original faith, but it will also help me build a new one. It makes Jinwan fall asleep, so now I'm not Jinwan. So, since even you can ask this question, maybe it means that you don't love me anymore." Jinwan finally came to a shallow conclusion. Seeing Jinwan's indifferent look when she said that she didn't love him anymore, Mo Jingshan remembered the dozens of messages she sent him 3 years ago, one of which was, "Mo Jingshan, I love you." But under his forced calm and indifference, he read those messages one by one and deleted them one by one. Mo Jingshan didn't force Jinwan to go back to Xingtang Hotel. In fact, even if Jinwan went back, she wouldn't have much time to rest. At most, she would sleep at night. She had nothing to do now. She squeezed all her work into a few days, and it didn't matter where she lived. She decided to stay in the hotel, which meant that she had officially entered the busy work of the business trip. And after Jinwan poured out all her heart to him, she returned to the gentle, cold, and untouchable person she was when she first returned to the country. Sometimes, Mo Jingshan's car was parked in front of the hotel where Jinwan was staying. Jinwan saw it when she came out, but she didn't go to their car. Instead, she went straight to the subway station or got into the car of some business partners waiting outside. It was autumn in Beijing and the weather had turned cold these days. After Jinwan finished her work at noon, she could have taken a break in the afternoon, but she suddenly received a call. It was Secretary Yang, who worked for Mr. Vince. She said that Mr. Vince suddenly had acute gastritis. Yesterday, when he was sent to the hospital, he learned that he had been having a fever for several days, and when he was sent to the hospital, he was unconscious. Chapter 586. When she arrived at the hospital, she learned that he had been sent to the hospital with acute gastritis yesterday and had been transferred to a general ward for an anti-inflammatory injection today. Jinwan called Secretary Yang again. After confirming the situation, she bought some liquid nutrition products for gastritis near the hospital and brought them in. Because they had come to Beijing on a temporary business trip, there were no family members or people from the company here. Yesterday, some business partners must have come to visit, so today the ward was particularly quiet. Seeing Jinwan come, Secretary Yang went out. Jinwan walked over and saw Mr. Vince leaning against the bed with a pale face. He was still receiving in 4 and there were several needle marks on the back of his hand. It could be seen that he had received a lot of anti-inflammatory injections. What did I tell you the other day? I told you to go to the hospital as soon as possible, but you didn't listen and suddenly became so serious. Did you go out to socialize and drink when your stomach was uncomfortable these days? Jinwan put down the nutrition products in her hand. Seeing her come, Mr. Vince was in a good mood although his face was not healthy. He said with a smile, I thought I could hold on. It's just gastritis, but I didn't expect to be knocked down by a few glasses of wine. Jinwan looked at him speechlessly and took the thermometer from his bedside. It's all right. It seems that you don't have a fever anymore. Secretary Yang said that she didn't know you had a high fever until yesterday. Your secretary is not very reliable. That day in the exhibition hall, I knew you had a fever. Why didn't she find out? She didn't stay in the same hotel as me. I asked her to go to several districts around Beijing for inspection and didn't ask her to follow me all the time, Mr. Vince explained. No wonder. Jinwan sighed. The doctor said it's all right, right? Just gastritis? Mr. Vince nodded with a faint smile. What else could it be? If it were any other serious illness, do you think Secretary Yang would have the time to leave the ward to the two of us? Jinwan, at this time he still didn't forget to flirt with a girl. She opened the things that she had bought. I bought some powders or paste that are suitable for brewing. In your current condition, you should only be able to eat liquid food for a few days. Take care of your stomach and don't drink for a while. People like us are always envied by others. It looks like we're especially rich, have a smooth life and don't have to worry about anything. However, most of our investments and business deals were negotiated over drinks. Do you think that BGY's general manager is a freeloader? Talking about business while drinking is also a skill. It's much more useful than your drinking capacity of a few glasses. Jinwan chuckled. That's right. Being a poor drinker has its advantages. At least it won't irritate your stomach like this. I think you're risking your life to do business. It's not as serious as you make it out to be. Have you ever been drunk before? Mr. Vince asked with a smile even though he knew the answer. Jinwan paused, but her hands didn't stop unpacking the supplements. She just said lightly, I was drunk but I haven't been drunk for a long time. All these years in London she had actually been slightly drunk. Although she said she was drunk, she wasn't completely drunk. At the very least she had always been sober. All these years she had to maintain her sobriety at all times to prevent her heart from falling. Their conversation shifted from wine to other topics. Jinwan was used to talking about work in front of Mr. Vince. In the past it was like this in London and it was the same after returning to China. In the past, to prevent him from talking about their relationship and causing awkwardness, she would always find topics to talk about. Now she didn't need to deliberately find topics to talk about, but this habit of talking had been formed. But this was also good. At the very least it wouldn't be awkward. What exactly is going on between you and COMO? After chatting for 2 hours in the ward, Jinwan originally planned to let Mr. Vince close his eyes and sleep for a while, but after a moment of silence his voice suddenly rang again. This time it was no longer just about work. Jinwan's hand that was casually flipping through the phone paused slightly. She looked up at him and happened to meet Mr. Vince's eyes. Her eyes fell back on the phone and her fingers slid open WeChat. She replied to Xia Tian who had just sent her a message. Then she accidentally saw the WeChat message below that she hadn't replied to. The man's name was still blank and so was his WeChat moments, but his profile picture was still hers. He hadn't changed it or he didn't intend to change it at all. She gently pressed the screen of the phone with her finger and smiled. What else could it be? We were just married before. Later, when we were in the same business circle, we inevitably met and had some minor friction. It seems that he doesn't intend to let you go. How did you two get divorced? Are you sure you've already divorced? Jinwan didn't understand why he asked this. She immediately felt a little amused. I signed the divorce agreement. After that, I went to the UK. As for the divorce procedures, I think even if I didn't go to the Civil Affairs Bureau in person, he would have the ability to handle the divorce. Why do you ask me this? Mr. Vince's expression faltered. You didn't go to the Civil Affairs Bureau? Jinwan also paused, feeling that he seemed to be implying something. What? Mr. Vince's eyes darkened, but he sighed helplessly with a smile. Jinwan, this is a society ruled by law. Since your marriage with Mo Jingshan was carried out in China, not registered abroad, a divorce is not as simple as a piece of paper. No matter how capable he is, To complete the divorce in China, in addition to your signature, he has to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau in person. Even if Mo Jingshan is the king of heaven, he can't do it for you in person. The corner of Jin Wan's mouth twitched, and a corner of her heart sank. What do you mean? Although this is not a very optimistic situation for me, I still suggest you re-examine your relationship with Mo Jingshan. Are you sure you're divorced? Jin Wan, how could he not be divorced? For the sake of her life, Mo Jingshan had made such a huge change. He had forced her to leave and forced her to live in England alone. She had to face the unknown for the next 3 years alone. He had even taken the cruelest step. How could he not divorce her? Besides, he had sent the divorce agreement to her first, and she had sent it back to him after signing it. Although the man's column was blank when she signed it, he should have signed it immediately after receiving it. Signing, divorce, every step was the same as in her previous life. Chapter 587. Unless in her previous life they hadn't divorced completely. Seeing Jin Wan's bewitched look, Mr. Vince frowned. Have you ever seen what a divorce certificate looks like? Jin Wan put her hand on her lap and didn't speak. She just looked up at him. Aren't there many kinds of divorces in China? With the power of the Mo family and Mo Jingshan's ability, as long as I sign my name I can get it done, can't I? Mr. Vince gave a rare sneer. Naive. Jin Wan didn't speak. In the afternoon she sat with Mr. Vince in the hospital for a while and talked about other things. At sunset, when the doctor came into the ward to take him for a stomach examination, Jin Wan got up and left. On the way back to the hotel, she took out her mobile phone and looked up various questions on the internet about whether a person must be present in the divorce proceedings. The answers she found were all the same. Both parties must be present at the same time. This was a legal condition for divorce proceedings. The taxi stopped in front of the hotel. The driver looked back at her, only to see that she looked puzzled after looking at her cell phone. Then she closed her eyes and leaned against the seat as if she was about to fall asleep. The driver stopped the car and woke her up. Miss, we've arrived. Are you not feeling well? Do you need me to take you to the hospital? Jin Wan immediately opened her eyes, which were not sleepy at all. No. With that she paid the taxi fare and got out of the car. Before returning to her room she picked up her cell phone and wanted to call Mo Jingshan to ask him about it. However, when she thought of a certain possibility and recalled how heartless she had been to him that day, she felt it was unnecessary to call him now. Forget it. She'd better finish the business in Jing City as soon as possible and go back to High City as soon as possible. The next morning when Jin Wan woke up and turned on her cell phone, she was suddenly bombarded by several messages. Xia Tian, what happened to you? Picture. Jin Wan zoomed in on the picture Xia Tian sent and saw that it was a gossip section of a financial newspaper. There was a color photo on it. The scene in the photo was Mr. Vince's ward in the hospital yesterday. Jin Wan was feeding Mr. Vince and both of them had smiles on their faces. They seemed to be very close. From the angle of the photo, one could tell that it was taken by a medical staff or a passerby through the small square window on the door of the ward. They didn't expect that people in the business circle like them would be recognized by passers-by and even spread the photo as gossip. The business world wasn't as complicated as the entertainment world, but some famous bosses or top-notch professionals were often interviewed by the media. Gradually, people would recognize them. What's more, the real estate industry had gained a lot of attention in the country. Therefore, many people had seen the names and photos of some of the people in charge of large domestic real estate groups like BGY. The caption on the photo was, "The reason why Forbes #1 young female entrepreneur returned to China was because she fell in love with BGY Group's general manager." After seeing this report, Jin Wan didn't reply to Xia Tian's message. Instead, she made a phone call and asked someone to inform the media to quickly withdraw this messy news. MN Group might not be powerful enough to turn the clouds and rain over their hands, but she still had the ability to suppress this kind of gossip in the small financial news media. Furthermore, financial newspapers didn't have as much attention as entertainment newspapers. She had to withdraw the news and the photo before it was spread out. After dealing with the media, persuading, pressuring and several other methods were used, the other party finally obediently withdrew the report that was originally going to be posted online. They also planned to publicly apologize for the false report and the act of fabricating a story based on the photos submitted by passers-by in the newspaper tomorrow. It was already afternoon. Jin Wan had several social engagements to attend today. She was going to have dinner with several partners in Beijing, so it was inevitable that she would drink some wine. She had booked a car in advance to pick her up at the club when it was time. After arriving at the entertainment club, Jinwan shook hands and chatted with the bosses of several business partners. Because they were all old friends who had worked with her for a long time, Jinwan didn't feel particularly restrained tonight. She didn't restrain herself when eating and drinking. Of course, she knew her alcohol tolerance, so she didn't drink too much. During this time, there were many people who asked her about the news with Mr. Vince today. Jinwan smiled and said she was just going to visit an old friend. However, she didn't expect that a passerby would take a photo of her outside the ward and spread it. She explained that she had been single all these years and that if she really had a boyfriend one day she would make it clear. Seeing that her words were very clear, and that there were not so many messy rumors in this circle, they laughed it off and continued to talk about business as usual. In the second half of the show, it was already 10 o'clock at night. It was raining heavily outside the club, so the bosses suggested waiting for the rain to stop. They arranged a large room in the club to play cards, sing, and drink a few cups of wine. Jinwan was slightly tipsy. She was in a good mood because she had just talked about a very good project, so she went to join in the fun. After 3 rounds of drinking in the private room, the bosses were playing cards. Jinwan drank a little too much tonight. Holding a can of beer that had just been opened, she walked to a corner of the luxury private room on the top floor of the club and looked at the semi-curved French windows. It was raining heavily outside. She held the beer in one hand and pressed the other against the window. Through the thick glass, she looked down at the lights of Beijing. But she was not in the mood to appreciate the rain in the waning lights. Her mind kept echoing with Mr. Vince's words about whether she was really divorced. The more she thought about it, the more she drank and the more sober she became. It was almost 12 o'clock at night, but the rain did not stop and was even getting heavier. The car Jinwan had booked had been parked outside for a long time. The driver called her several times but she did not answer. The private room was too noisy and Jinwan did not hear it at all. Because she drank too much, she forgot that the driver would come to pick her up. When Jinwan finally remembered it, it was already 12:30 at night. She picked up her cell phone and called the driver, staggering out as she spoke. She had just arrived at the elevator door and was about to step in when she saw Mo Jingshan suddenly appear in the elevator. She paused in her footsteps. Chapter 588. The moment she met the man's gaze in the elevator, Jinwan's legs froze. Was she hallucinating because she drank too much? Why did Mo Jingshan come here at this time? However, before she could say anything, the man walked out expressionlessly and glanced at the room behind her, which reeked of alcohol and was still filled with people singing in karaoke. Jinwan tried to straighten herself up, but the man only approached her. She subconsciously tried to move aside, but the moment she moved, she swayed. Just as she was about to fall, her waist was suddenly tightened. Mo Jingshan easily held her waist and then lowered his eyes to coldly glance at her. First, you went to the ward to flirt with that person from BGY, and then you came out in the middle of the night to socialize and drink with these people. You even got yourself drunk. Is this how you use the reason you don't love me to declare war on me? Jinwan's mind was in a mess. She couldn't understand what he was saying at all. She instinctively raised her hand to push him away, but the moment her hand touched the man's shoulder, her whole body fell uncontrollably into his arms. The moment her head bumped against his chest, she frowned and struggled to move back, but the man held her in his arms and showed no signs of letting her go. Mo Jingshan, let go of me. I'm not drunk. Jinwan heard the elevator door open and close. She staggered as she was held by the man into the elevator. Finally she was brought in. She raised her hand and pushed and hammered him twice, but she couldn't push him away, so she gave up struggling and just leaned in his arms, motionless. However, the more she breathed in the familiar scent of the man, the more drunk she seemed to be. She tried to shake her head to clear her head, but before she could move her head, the hand that was on her shoulder pressed her down heavily, and her entire body was pressed into his embrace. You? Jinwan's face was pressed against his chest. For a moment she could barely breathe. She forced her head away but her mouth was moaning. I'm really not drunk. I can still recognize you as Mo Jingshan. Really? The man didn't speak again until she was taken out of the club. There was a car parked in front of the door. Jinwan looked outside and suddenly smiled, mumbling, it's raining so heavily, good? Before she finished speaking, the man pressed her head into the car. Jinwan was pressed into the car. She was so drunk that it was impossible for her to sit in the passenger seat. Now she was almost lying on the back seat. She tried to get up, but after a long time she could only lie there weakly. Then she frowned and held her stomach. This posture made the liquor in her stomach shake back and forth, and she felt a little nauseous. "Do you want to throw up?" Seeing her holding her stomach, the man asked before closing the car door. Jinwan didn't respond and still lay on the back seat. She wanted to move, but she didn't have the strength. As soon as she moved, she felt dizzy and her stomach churned. Seeing that she didn't speak, Mo Jingshan closed the car door. The car drove fast. The driver and the car that Jinwan had arranged to pick her up were left outside the club. She couldn't remember anything at all. The hotel she was staying in was not very far from the club, but it was still 5 miles away from Xingtang Hotel. The car stopped at the door of her hotel. In the heavy rain, the car was washed by the rain and glowed coldly. The moment the door opened, Jinwan suddenly sat up with strength. When the man was about to take her out, she pushed him away hard, jumped out of the car, rushed into the rain and vomited on the ground. She had endured until now and didn't vomit on the car, which was the last reason she had in her drunken appearance. Ugh. After vomiting for a long time, she only vomited a lot of alcohol. She didn't eat much in the evening, but she drank a lot, especially a lot of beer. Jinwan's alcohol tolerance was only limited to foreign wine or champagne, but she still couldn't handle domestic white wine and beer. Fortunately, the rain was so heavy that the alcohol she vomited was instantly washed into the roadside sewer and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After vomiting out a lot of alcohol in her stomach, Jinwan's legs softened and she almost knelt on the ground. At the moment when her knees almost touched the ground, her abdomen suddenly tightened, and the man took her into his arms in time. He looked down at her who was standing in the rain but still hadn't woken up and still had a dazed expression. The man's expression was cold as he lifted her up in his arms and helped her stand firmly. "Do you still want to throw up?" he asked. His tone was obviously angry, but he didn't take it too seriously because she was not sober enough. Jinwan looked at the man in front of her in a daze, shook her head, and then suddenly looked like she was going to vomit again. She tried to push him away again, but this time she didn't push him away. He took her to the side and helped her bend over to vomit, lest she lost her balance and fell to the ground. This time she didn't vomit much. She probably drank too much and stayed in the car for so long. She felt so uncomfortable because of carsick and the after effects of being drunk. After vomiting for a while, Jinwan was completely exhausted and didn't even have the strength to struggle in Mo Jingshan's arms. She leaned weakly in the man's arms with her legs weak. Seeing that she was almost done vomiting, Mo Jingshan carried her in his arms and strode into the hotel. The hotel staff saw Jinwan, who was soaked in the rain, being carried in by a man who was also soaked in the rain. The staff had an impression of Jinwan and knew that she lived here, but the man carrying her, originally they wanted to step forward to ask or help, but when the man carried her into the elevator, he cast a cold glance at them, causing them to stop in their tracks. They didn't dare to take a step closer. Jinwan's room card had her floor and room number written on it. When she was carried in, she frowned and subconsciously raised her hand to scratch the door, mumbling, "No. Mo Jingshan, this is where I live, get out." The man didn't seem to hear what she was muttering and directly brought her in. Chapter 589. Jinwan was placed on the sofa. Her wet hair stuck to her neck and cheeks. Her eyes, red from the alcohol, were slightly open. She stared blankly at the man in front of her, who did not lose any of his temperament even after being drenched in the rain. Since she said those words to him that day, she had not thought of facing him again. Right now her head was dizzy and her body was heavy. She simply sat on the sofa and did not move. Although Jinwan had drunk too much, her habits in recent years had allowed her to maintain a little bit of rationality. Even if she was really drunk, she would not talk nonsense. Even if she really wanted this man to get out of her room, she raised her hand slightly, put it down, and did not speak in the end. After getting drunk and vomiting, the only thing left to do now was probably sleep. However, the man's voice rang when her thoughts were about to return to chaos. "You were just drenched in the rain. Do you want to go in and take a shower, or do you want me to take off your clothes here?" Jinwan's mind paused. She opened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her in a daze. "You, don't talk nonsense. Go in and take a shower." Jinwan looked at him and then at the bathroom not far behind him and did not move. It was not until the man bent down to carry her from the sofa into the bathroom that she hurriedly dodged his hand as if she had been electrocuted. She staggered to her feet and walked to the bathroom, but still could not stand steadily because of the alcohol. She supported her hand on the wall for a while before she walked in and closed the door. She was not in the mood to take a bath, so she just turned on the shower head to wash herself. Then she remembered that she had just vomited, so she grabbed the spare disposable toothpaste and toothbrush in the hotel bathroom. After brushing for a long time, she did not know if there was any taste of alcohol on her body or in her mouth. She lowered her head and sniffed but could not smell anything. She stood under the shower head in a daze. Her eyes were still a little dazed and she could not stay completely sober. But she still remembered that Mo Jingxian was outside, so she took a little longer to shower. Half an hour later she put on a bathrobe, casually dried her hair and went out. When she went out, her hair was still dripping and the water droplets submerged in the bathrobe, making it a little cold. She showered after being drenched in the rain, but the man was not in a hurry to shower. His soaked suit jacket was thrown on the sofa in the room that could only accommodate 2 people. Due to the color of his black shirt and trousers, it was hard to see any changes after being drenched. Jean Wan stood outside the bathroom door, but her footing was a little unstable. She turned around and leaned against the wall to support herself. She forced herself to stay sober as she said, "My work in Jing City is almost done. Tonight is my last social engagement. Perhaps thinking that I can return to High City tomorrow, I felt relieved and drank a little more, but I'm not too drunk." Hearing that she would return to High City tomorrow, the man did not move but his eyes fell on her. Because Jean Wan had just showered and was drunk, her cheeks looked redder than usual and her eyes were dazed. She was not as firm and indifferent as she had been that day when she stood in front of him and said that she no longer loved him. She stood against the wall and said indifferently, "My ticket back to High City has been booked. The flight is tomorrow afternoon." The man just sat there coldly and quietly watching her. Jean Wan raised her hand to touch her still wet hair. When she felt the water on her head, she frowned uncomfortably. She wanted to go back to the bathroom to get a towel to wipe her hair, but then she paused and thought of something. She said, "Did you see the news that I went to the hospital yesterday?" She paused and said, "In the past 3 years, if I had accepted any man's pursuit, I wouldn't have been able to stand here now, whether it was Mr. Vince or any other man. When I didn't know the reason for the divorce, after the divorce, I had the right to pursue happiness at any time. Even if I really have an ambiguous relationship with any man, or have feelings beyond friendship, it doesn't violate any morality, and it can't even be considered as having an affair." Besides, she had rejected Mr. Vince countless times and had never responded to him emotionally. This time, it was only because Mr. Vince was sick that she took the initiative to care about him. In her eyes, she only stood on the side of friendship. She was used to doing things her own way and didn't care what others thought. Perhaps because she hadn't vomited all the wine in her stomach, or perhaps because it was too hot when she took a shower in the bathroom, Jean Wan could only stay awake for a moment. She couldn't remember what she was saying, but from the man's eyes, she could see that she seemed to be saying something particularly heartless. She still felt like vomiting, so she turned back to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, but nothing came out. The man didn't say anything because of what she said just now. He threw a towel to her head. "Wipe your hair clean. I'm going to buy some hangover medicine." Jean Wan didn't speak. She just raised her hand and pressed the towel that almost covered her entire head over her head. It wasn't until she heard the door open and close that she pulled the towel down and wiped her face mechanically. After drying her hair, Jean Wan walked out of the bathroom. She was a little thirsty and went to pour herself a glass of water. However, while her body was weak, she couldn't even hold the glass firmly. The glass of hot water that wasn't hot fell to the ground before it reached her mouth. Fortunately, the water wasn't hot. Jean Wan stood by the table, watching the water spilled on the carpet and the glass that fell to the side. She stared blankly for a long while before she came back to herself. She raised her eyes and looked out the window at the heavy rain that was still falling. The floor she lived on was very high. What floor was it? It seemed to be the 30th floor of a hotel. From here, she could see half of Jing City brightly lit under the rainy night. Jean Wan poured herself another glass of water and carefully picked up the glass to drink, but her hands were still so weak that she could barely hold it. She held the glass with both hands, but in the end, before the water reached her mouth, it spilled all over her. She gave up and kicked away the 2 cups that had fallen to the ground with an ugly expression. She raised her hand and touched the wet bathrobe. She felt a little hot in her head and listened to the sound of rain outside the window. She really wanted to feel the cool breeze to wake herself up. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.